In a world where commoners are looked down on, a poor boy dreamed of learning magic. His first teacher was a crazy old man living on the streets. After years of brutal training, the boy grows into a powerful mercenary mage. But instead of becoming a legendary warrior, he gets a completely unexpected job, teaching spoiled noble girls how to behave. And somehow, every arrogant young lady he trains transforms into a perfect mage. Can a former street orphan become the greatest tutor in the entire kingdom? In the city of Ebelstein, there lived an old man who performed miracles. An old liar. That's what the slum dwellers called this shabby old man. He mastered only the magic of the first star, but he bragged so wildly that he called himself a great mage, and he had a nasty temper. He seriously lost his temper when children tried to prank him, and young Derek learned magic from this old man. He had no great reason for this. The old man simply needed his followers, and he needed knowledge. Months passed, and then one day, Derek sensed a flow of mana, surprising the old man. As soon as he sensed the mana, he immediately opened his eyes and stretched out his hand, firing a magic arrow into a tree, causing his teacher to gape in shock. So MC spent a year next to this old man carrying out his errands and became a mage of the first star. That evening, they gathered around the fire, and the old man said he'd heard that beyond the northern wall of Ebelstein, some noble offspring reached the third star even before the coming-of-age ceremony. A commoner like him could spend his entire life honing that level and barely achieve it. So let him not become arrogant, as if he wouldn't break as soon as he hit the wall. The old man constantly launched into long discourses about blood, saying that magic depended on it, and no matter how hard you tried, it was all useless. He continued to hammer into his head thoughts of the insurmountable divide between nobility and commoners. Perhaps this was a manifestation of his longing for everything he had never been able to achieve. That night seemed unusually long to him, and the next day, when he returned to his dwelling, the old man was dead. His entire body was covered in bruises, as if he had been beaten. He thought he had gotten into a fight somewhere and died. But later he learned that the old man had been beaten by guards. They said he was caught trying to steal a second-star spellbook from a warehouse, and no one understood why an old man with no ambition would do something like that. When he buried the old man, a system window appeared in front of him, informing him that he had unlocked the basics of magic and could now choose a primary school. But he couldn't change his mind. The lying old man always told him about blood, but to his regret, he couldn't have noble blood because he wasn't originally from this world. 4 years passed. Katya Flameheart is the former mistress of the now fallen House of Viscounts Flameheart. Born a noble woman, she was a third-star mage, and many mercenary companies tried to acquire her. Remaining in Ebelstein, she took contracts through the Beldern Mercenary Company and trained Derek, who joined the company as a youth, to use first-star magic. He learned a lot from Katya, a third-star mage, and she once told him that it was natural for a mage to want to rise higher, and, as he knew, he had talent. But excessive greed would only slow down his progress. He told her that he would keep this in mind, and she told him to close his eyes and feel his mana, to calmly sense where it was born, how it flowed, and imagine that he was using mana to bring the imagined image into reality. He did this, and she thought that he definitely had a significant reserve of innate mana, and perhaps due to his rich combat experience, his control was also stable. His eyes suddenly opened, causing her to be surprised, and then an explosion thundered throughout the tavern. The mercenaries became worried, and already thought someone was attacking them, and ran to check everything, while MC, meanwhile, caught his breath from the flash of magic. Katya suddenly grabbed his hand, and he called out to her in confusion, and she asked him not to say anything and just follow her. They left the tavern, passing the frightened mercenaries, and she led him into an alley, then checked to see if anyone was in the area. She turned to him and told him to listen carefully to what she was about to say. He became slightly nervous, and she said that, as he knew, nobles were very sensitive to their privileges, and magic was the greatest of them. People considered innate powers a blessing, but this only applies to nobles. Among commoners, it is very rare for someone to reach the third star, but usually, these are those who have dedicated their entire lives to magic, and what he had just used was a second-star illusion spell called Auditory Hallucination. So at 14, he became a second-star mage. After that, Katya traveled with him, imparting various spells to him, and sometimes even telling him about the high society she had moved in as a noblewoman. A year passed, and then Katya left. He heard that the county of Elfster had hired her as a personal tutor. The Elfster family was a family that even the Grand Duke of the capital had to reckon with, because Count Elfster was on their side. For Katya, this was an offer she couldn't refuse. Becoming a nobleman's magic teacher of such a level was a great success for anyone. Katya left, giving him a second-star spellbook as a parting gift, which contained a lot of things he could still learn. The book contained various combat magic spells, transformation magic, summoning magic, and search magic. A year later, he independently studied and mastered 2 more second-star spells, and all this at the age of 16. Moreover, he does not intend to stop there. He came to Beldern's Tears Tavern as usual, and the owner, Jaden, said that they finally got a proper order from the Grand Duchy of Duplain. He understands what that means, right? Derek asked why such a house would hire them. He answered with a smile that it didn't matter now. It's Duplain. They have a lot of money. He grabbed him out of joy and said that if they perform well, They could get connections for the future. MC smoothed his clothes after his grab and asked what they needed from them. He answered him that nothing special. They needed to destroy a few monsters on the outskirts of the Grand Duke's territory. He asked, "Is that all?" He confirmed it and asked if he really thought the nobles would go back on their word. He rubbed his chin in confusion and remarked that it was strange. Such an influential family as Duplan asks a simple squad of mercenaries to kill monsters? He headed for the exit, saying that he wouldn't do it, but Jaden excitedly asked him to wait. He turned to him and told him to just call someone else. He knows that he doesn't take on strange cases. He answered him that if he could find someone else, he would have already done it. They need a mage. He knows that mages are rare among mercenaries these days, right? He is the only one who can do it. That's why he called him. MC asked why they need a mage to kill a few monsters. In any case, he doesn't want to get involved in this matter. Before he left, Jaden tossed him a gold coin, which he deftly caught, and said that it wasn't even payment, it was an advance. The reward was tempting, so he agreed. After that, he met with the customers, a stern-looking man, a kind woman, and a mysterious girl in a hood. Jaden patted Derek on the shoulder, telling him to show respect. These are his clients. The man immediately refused when he saw the boy and asked if he was offering him a child who hadn't even come of age. He'd heard he'd distinguished himself in the Dawn War, so he had some expectations, but he couldn't believe he was sending a child on a mission. He told him that this guy was a true professional, the best mage he knew, but he didn't believe him, and headed for the exit, saying that this wasn't a mission that could be entrusted to some child. The woman stopped him and quietly said something to him, after which they both looked at the girl and decided to take Derek. After that, they went to the Grand Duchy of Duplan. MC skillfully dealt with all the goblins with his sword and magic. He killed one with a magic arrow, beheaded another, and struck the third, who decided to attack him from behind with lightning. After that, he turned to his clients, who had been watching him the whole time, and said that he was finished. The man noted reservedly that he had dealt with so many monsters in no time, and the mysterious girl smiled. That same evening, in the tavern, upon hearing the news, Feline indignantly asked Derek, "So? He became the noble's dog?" She climbed onto the bar in rage, and Jaden asked her to get down. There were customers there. She ignored him and said that no matter how pathetic they, commoners, were, they shouldn't become these nobles' pets. Jaden asked, "Derek didn't tell her how much they paid for this job, right?" She asked discontentedly. And how much did they offer for him to throw aside his pride and jump at their feet? He noted that, in fact, jumping at their feet wasn't part of the job, then gestured to her, and she asked in bewilderment, "1 silver coin?" He shook his head with a smile, and she exclaimed with admiration, "So, a gold coin? Then she also wants to crawl at their feet." The man finally told her to shut up. He also said that there was no need to crawl at their feet. After getting drunk, Feline fell asleep peacefully, and the man asked Derek how his order had gone. He replied that it was nothing special. He had just killed a few goblins, and that was it. He asked if the first impression had been so-so, but they looked rich, didn't they? He replied that they did, but all three were lying. The noble officer said he was looking for exactly 3 things: youth, endurance, and communication skills. But that man had none of those qualities. And the woman who called herself a dishwasher, her hands were too clean for someone who did dirty work. And that trainee inspector was strange too. Jaden suddenly sternly reminded him that they were mercenaries. They didn't need to know too much about the clients, they just did the job and got paid for it. MC didn't say anything else, and thought that he was right. This place was wild lands, and here the only thing that mattered was survival. Nothing else mattered. The next day, he went to the duchy again to clear out monsters. Having finished with them, he approached the customers and said that now goblins will not appear here for a long time. The noble officer remarked that he had done an excellent job, and Jaden started a conversation about payment. After which he successfully received 2 gold coins and happily patted Derek on the head, wondering what they could do with this gold. He suggested that they talk about it later, and the noble officer coughed into his fist, attracting attention, and told Derek that he highly valued his skills and therefore would like to entrust him with a new order. He agreed. They both looked at him in bewilderment, and he told them that the Grand Duchy would pay 15 gold coins for this order. Jaden was immediately interested, and MC agreed. Having gathered their things, they went straight to the Duplan residence, and Jaden looked around, noting that he was quite impressed by the place where the Grand Duke lived. The noble officer said that before they entered, he should introduce himself, and Jaden suggested that he drop all the formality. It wasn't their first time seeing each other. The man said his name was Dillon. He was the chief steward, serving the Grand Duke, and he wanted to apologize for concealing his status due to the nature of his job. Jaden didn't know what to say, and the woman said her name was Katerina, the Grand Duke's chief maid. Jaden became flustered and said that they were people of such high rank, and he should greet them properly. He bowed to them, told them his name, and Derek thought, so he wasn't the assignment officer, but the chief steward, and she wasn't the scullery maid, but the chief maid. He expected this, but they turned out to be quite influential people. The mysterious girl stepped out of the carriage, and Jaden asked, Then who is she? She took off her hood, letting down her luxurious black hair, attracting Derek's attention, and said that her name was Aceline Eleanor Duplain, and she wanted to appoint him as a magic tutor for her younger sister, Diella. He was surprised that he was chosen to teach a noble lady. Meanwhile, Raig burst into the Duke's office and told his father and brother Valerian to just look at this. Duke Raymond Oswald Duplain, without looking up from his work, told him to behave with dignity, and he exclaimed that the one who should behave with dignity is not him, but Diella. She has gone too far. Now she raises her hand even to those he hired. He pointed to the maid who was crying after the recent prank of the Duke's youngest daughter, and his brother Valerian asked him to lower his voice. They are talking. He ignored this and said indignantly that more than 10 servants had quit last month alone. Not to mention that she was destroying everything around her whenever she felt like it. He approached his father's desk and asked how much longer he would turn a blind eye to this bandit. Valerian jumped up from his seat and called out sternly to him, after which he said that was enough, let him go. Raig threw him a displeased look and told his father that even if Diella was good for nothing, they still had Aceline. Therefore, he thought it was time to let Diella go. Raymond looked up from his work and said that it was not for him to decide. Raig said that he had instructed the head steward to find a monastery. They said that the conditions there were good. The children of nobles often went there too. Rather than live as a burden, wouldn't it be better for her to dedicate herself to serving God? If her presence was causing the family so many problems, then it would be better to send her away. The Duke immediately punished him for these words, slamming his head on the table, and repeated that he had already said that it was not his decision to make. Raig gritted his teeth and told his father that when the time came, he would have to make a decision. Meanwhile, Aceline led Derek to her father and asked if he had ever heard of her younger sister. He answered that he had seen her name in the Duplain family register, and she noted with a little sadness that she probably was little known to the public. At that moment, the doors of her father's office swung open, and her brothers came out. She excitedly called out to Valerian, and he said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time. How was her life in Ebelstein? She answered him that thanks to his care, she lived comfortably, and he awkwardly waved her hand, saying that as she saw, Raig had suffered a little, so they would talk later. MC carefully examined the two and then glanced at the crying maid. They both entered the office. Father and daughter exchanged news, and she finally introduced him to Derek, saying that he was the magic teacher she had brought from Ebelstein. He said that he would take on Diella's training. Raymond reacted to this without much interest, and she stood up, saying that she saw that he was busy, so they would go. But the Duke ordered Derek to stay. Continuing with his business, he noted that he was quite young. He was 16, right? He confirmed this and asked if he had any magic. He answered that he could use a little first-star magic, and Raymond looked at him with interest, saying that he had no reason to lie. Modesty is not always perceived as a virtue. MC looked at him and thought, he is the Grand Duke of Duplain, and it seems modesty will not work on a 5th-star mage. He apologized to him if it seemed impolite to him, and he told him that everything was fine. He knew why he behaved this way. Too much talent could begin to destroy him from within. Judging by his age and clothes, he does not look like someone who is fit to be a magic teacher. He answered him that he was a mercenary, and Raymond said that since his daughter chose him, he would not ask any more questions. He allowed him to enter the residence where Diella lived. Let the maid accompany him. Now he can go. Derek asked if he could ask one thing. He allowed him, and he said that he was a mercenary, and if he takes an order, his duty is to carry it out to the end. So that Lady Diella could study magic and enter high society as befits an aristocrat, Lady Aceline hired him. He asked why he was saying obvious things. He answered him that because he had an urgent request to make of him, the Duke became interested. Meanwhile, Diella was throwing plates at the poor maid, who immediately apologized in fear. She asked, displeased, does she think an apology will change anything with her status? Get her out of her sight immediately. If she sees her again, she'll throw that plate in her face. The poor maid flinched in fear and ran away. Meanwhile, Aceline was talking with Jaden while Derek was in her father's office. He asked why him. Magic teachers had to line up to work at Duplain. Besides, it would be difficult for a commoner to teach magic to an aristocrat. She replied that she had already tried almost all the famous magic masters on the continent, and they eventually gave up. So she decided to look for those who possessed magic but were in desperate straits. Although he had a mercenary background, he seemed somewhat familiar with the etiquette and culture of the nobility. He replied that his mentor was a fallen nobleman, once quite successful, and Derek had probably learned a lot from him. Aceline smiled and said that he seemed refined and kind, despite being a mercenary. She thought he would be able to gently rein in Diella and guide her. Jaden laughed and said that she needed to learn to read people better. Derek was a mage who grew up on the streets, working as a mercenary even before he came of age. She thought that someone from the streets could survive only thanks to sophistication and kindness. She thought about his words meanwhile. The head steward and a maid led Diella into the residence. He knocked on her door, but there was no answer, so he decided to enter. He introduced himself to her, and she asked him to come closer. As soon as he did, she turned to him with a smirk and poured a bucket of slop in his face. He tolerated this, and she mockingly said that it was such a misunderstanding. She thought that some kind of garbage rat had gotten in here. Is he the same mercenary that the general manager was talking about? Or maybe he is not. Looking at him, it seems to her that he really is a garbage rat. She placed a chair in front of him, climbed on it, and then poured another bucket on his head and said that she prepared it for him. This does bring back memories of home, doesn't it? He looks much better being doused with slop. He remained silent, and she threw the bucket aside, saying that the water had run out. What a pity. Because he didn't react to her mockery and looked straight at her, she was slightly confused, and then kicked him with her foot and exclaimed, "How dare he look at her like that?" Because of this, he fell right into a puddle, and she, taking off her shoe, grimaced in disgust and said that he stunk. She threw the shoe at him, after which, with a smirk, told him to know his place. Someone like him would teach her? Wasn't he taught common sense on the streets? Meanwhile, Duke Duplain looked out the window and remembered the conversation with Derek. He said that the fact that he was here meant that Lady Diela's problem couldn't be solved so easily. He wants to ask him, since he loves her more than anyone, how much authority is he willing to give him when it comes to teaching his daughter? And apparently the Duke has given him enough authority to hit her now. Diela touched her cheek, which was red from the blow, in shock, and he sternly ordered her to get up. She disobeyed him, and he hit her again, which confused her, because no one had treated her like that before. 3 years ago, he was going on a mission with his teacher, and he asked if she had to teach a stubborn student who didn't appreciate kindness. What would she do? Katya thought about it and said that she would try to understand him, accept him, and surround him with care. He asked, "Isn't that too idealistic? What about a student with whom this is even impossible?" She answered him that the essence of teaching is to guide the student in a better direction. If you can't get through understanding and acceptance, then you will have to find another starting point. He asked her what she meant, and she said that it was necessary to instill fear in the student. At the moment, MC followed her advice and told this spoiled girl to treat others with consideration and respect, and let her not make him repeat himself twice and get up. She stood up and then hit him back and asked how dare someone like him raise a hand to her. He hit her again and said that he doesn't like to repeat himself. When she deals with others, she should treat them with respect and consideration. She smirked, then called out to the butler and indignantly exclaimed, "Why isn't he doing anything?" This commoner dared to raise a hand to a young lady. He, accompanied by maids, immediately ran into the room and worriedly asked if she was okay, and then asked Derek what he was doing. How dare he raise a hand to her? If the Duke finds out about this, it will be bad. He took a scroll from his pocket and showed it to him, saying that his lordship had granted him full authority over Lady Diela's education and allowed him to use any methods he deemed necessary. Delon read the Duke's decree, and Diela looked at him in shock, not believing it. Night fell, and Valerian, having learned the news, angrily headed to Derek's room. While his brother tried to stop him, he burst into the room and asked, "So he's the mercenary?" MC, who was reading a book, looked up at him, and he immediately grabbed him and swung, asking how dare he hit his sister. Ray grabbed him, asking him to calm down and just talk, and Derek said that it was with his grace's permission. Ray pulled his brother away from him and reminded him that he was a guest brought by Aseline. If he behaved like this, what would happen to her position? After all, their father had also given his approval. Having calmed down, Valerian ordered Derek to come with him, and Raig told him not to interfere and mind his own business. He left the room, and Raig, with an awkward smile, told Derek that he heard about what happened. Diela really needs a couple of blows to come to her senses. He shouldn't worry. Valerian won't go too far. He nodded in response, then left with him, and Raig thought, why is he protecting this hopeless girl? Valerian led him to the children's room. He said that Diela once lived here. Since then, everything has remained the same. MC looked around and noticed a painting. Valerian came up to him and said that she really loved to draw. Every time she asked him to look at the drawings, she blushed. It was so cute, but she never finished her drawings. Most often she left a blank space and drew only the parts she liked. And he wants to apologize for what happened before. He got carried away. He told him that everything was fine, but why did he bring him to this room? Valerian told him that he wanted to show him that Diela wasn't a child deserving of contempt or beatings. But at some point she became obsessed with blood purity, and eventually she was kicked out of the main estate. He can't even imagine what turned her into such a person. MC became interested in the books on the shelves, and Valerian said that they must prevent her from being sent to the monastery. If she mastered at least one magic of the first star, then he could somehow convince her father. He grabbed his shoulders and asked him to save his sister, and he told him to wait. Judging by the notes in the margins of these books, she hasn't completely given up magic. He looked at the table and asked, those books, they're all theory from the School of Charters, right? He confirmed this, noting that nobles study at the School of Charters, and Derek, glancing at the unfinished painting, slammed the book shut and handed it to Valerian, saying that he would try to do it. It was late at night. Diela was already asleep. Suddenly MC poured a bucket of water on her, and she jumped up screaming. And he asked, did she seriously fall asleep? She clenched her teeth in rage and asked, Was he crazy? He unceremoniously grabbed her hand and said that they needed to go somewhere, and she ordered him to let her go immediately. How dare he touch her? They went out into the corridor. All this time she tried to break free from his grip and exclaimed that she was not going anywhere with him. Seeing that the servants were just standing there, she indignantly exclaimed, "What are they doing? Let them stop this commoner immediately." Derek led her out of the residence without any problems, and when they had walked a good distance, he roughly threw her to the ground, and she asked what he thought this would change. Who was he to teach her anyway? He asked if she wanted to hear something interesting. He smirked and said that, to be honest, he had no intention of teaching her magic. He just enjoyed beating up arrogant nobles. His words scared her, and he asked if she agreed with that. Someone from the bottom has no reason to like nobles. All this tutoring nonsense is just an excuse. It's an excuse to beat up arrogant, ordinary aristocrats like her. He drew his blade and asked if she knew how beautiful the screams of noble people were. She became nervous and asked if he thought he could get away with it. He confirmed it with a smirk. She would soon be sent to a monastery anyway. Who would believe her words? And if something serious happens, he will simply atone for his guilt with his life. A commoner's life is worth that much, right? Or he can just run away, and then he will be quickly forgotten. After all, he will be doing Duke Duplain a favor by saving him a headache. Diella took his words seriously and realized that she could die, so she rushed towards the forest. If he caught her now, he would definitely kill her. And if she ran across the meadow to the estate, he would catch her right away, so she needed to break away from him in the forest. She knew the forest from where she could reach the estate. Then he would die, not her. She ran quickly, not paying attention to the branches cutting her skin, and jumped over all sorts of obstacles. But suddenly she saw a bright flash, turned around and saw how this commoner created a fireball, which surprised her greatly. A fireball is the magic of the second star. How can he use that? MC smirked and then threw a fireball right at her. She managed to react and clung to the ground, and the fireball crashed into a tree in front of her and exploded. She turned to him in fear, and he said that he seemed to have missed. After that, she continued running, periodically looking back at him, and because of this, she did not notice a tree root in front of her and stumbled, which immediately caused her to fall. Derek wasted no time and shot a magic arrow at her. She noticed it and jumped aside just a second before impact. Looking at the magic arrow stuck in the ground, she became nervous, because it could have flown right at her. He said that she was quite fast. He found it hard to believe that such speed could come from someone who had been cooped up all day. Glancing at him, she started running again, and for some reason he stayed. She wondered how much longer she had to run. Will she even be able to break away from him? At this rate, he'll definitely catch her. She turned around to check where he was, and he used magic and looked around, but she was nowhere to be found. He noticed that this was the same forest he'd seen in her paintings. She must have been running here since she was a child. Without realizing it, she sensed mana in this endless wilderness and transferred this feeling to the canvas. He realized something and turned around, seeing the girl jumping at him with a stone in her hands, and immediately drew his sword, swung it, defending himself. Because of this, Diella fell, and he said that he must admit, her spirit is worthy of admiration. Realizing that it was difficult to escape the pursuit, she decided to strike back. This decision was not easy for her. She tried to catch her breath, and he noticed that she no longer had the strength to run. Will she have dying words? Through heavy breathing, she laughed and then asked, does he think she will apologize to him? Unlike them, commoners, she does not grovel before others, so let him just kill her. He asked why she is so obsessed with blood superiority. This question made her shudder, and through clenched teeth asked, then what is left for her? If her blue blood were taken away, she would be left with nothing. She slammed her fist on the ground in rage and exclaimed that he could have told her that she still had magic, but he thinks she didn't try. She burst into tears and exclaimed that no matter how hard she tried, nothing works. Magic or painting, she can't do anything at all. She fails at absolutely everything. Then, what does she have left but her origin? If that disappears, then who will she be? MC remained silent, then coated the blade with mana and she prepared herself. He raised the sword above her and said that he had heard enough, and now it was time for her to go to the next world. He swung the blade, but a strange ringing and crunching sound was heard. Diella, who was already preparing for death, opened her eyes and saw that his sword was stuck in a block of ice that she unknowingly erected around herself for protection. She looked at her hands in shock, not understanding if she really did it, and then Derek put away his sword and bowed to her, saying that she did an excellent job. He was sorry for being rude to her. She stared at him in confusion, and he said with a smile that, although it can't be called real magic since it is only a manifestation of mana, but she still succeeded. Realizing that her life was not really in danger, she burst into loud tears and screamed. When she calmed down, MC bandaged her wounds and said that this means she belongs to the School of the Wild. He heard that most nobles study at the School of Charters. At their core, all schools of magic are the same, but the process of understanding and mastering them varies greatly. She is from the School of the Wild, so trying to learn magic through the theory of the School of Charters inevitably caused difficulties. It is like trying to put on clothes that do not fit, so she cannot do it. She asked how he knows this. Why did he think she was from the School of Wildlife? He told her that he had seen her drawings. She felt mana floating in nature and transferred it to the canvas. Mages born with an affinity for the School of Wildlife usually sense mana in nature as children. She frowned slightly, thinking about it, after which he finished bandaging and said that she could now walk. She stood up, checking how he had applied the bandage, and he said that she had managed to manifest mana, but there was still a long way to go. Starting tomorrow, he would teach her how to manifest mana naturally. She called out to him and looked away, thanking him with shy pride, and he, after a short pause, said that it was time for him to go. She followed him, and he asked, "So the painting of the sunset, is it her work?" She told him that she didn't know. She hadn't picked up a brush in a long time. He noticed that the painting was beautifully done, and she boasted to him that it was her masterpiece, and he was the first to realize that it was finished. Diella woke up early in the morning and immediately tried to manifest mana. A blue haze appeared around her hand, and she concentrated, trying not to miss it, but it quickly disappeared, and she frowned, thinking that it was difficult. After that, she left her room just as a maid passed by the door with a bucket of water. She jumped back in fright and accidentally spilled the bucket right on her nightgown, and fearfully asked her for forgiveness. Diella glared at her displeasedly, and she immediately fell at her feet, begging for forgiveness for this mortal sin. But Diella simply told her to watch where she was going from now on and left. The maid looked up at her in surprise, perplexed that she wasn't hitting her, but simply leaving. As soon as Diella left her side, the other maids ran to help her and asked if she was okay. She confusedly confirmed it, but the young lady only told her to be careful. Her colleague asked in surprise what happened after she left last night. Derek, meanwhile, was still sleeping, but suddenly there was a loud and insistent knock on the door, along with Diella's voice. He tiredly got up, rubbed his eyes, and opened the door, asking what was wrong. The butler asked the lady to observe manners, but she ignored him and told Derek to teach her how to control the mana she had manifested. She tried on her own, but nothing worked. Hearing this, Delon was very surprised, and she reminded him that he said he would teach her today, so let him begin. He closed the door, telling her to come in the afternoon, and Delon wiped away a tear of happiness upon learning of her success. Derek's behavior enraged her, and she continued to pound on the door, shouting angrily, "Who is he to tell her to come back later? Let him open the door immediately and teach her." MC went back to bed and somehow fell asleep to her screams. Time passed. Reg walked down the hallway, and the maids began to discuss Diella's behavior. She didn't break a single plate, and didn't even hit the maid who spilled the water. They say her magic has also awakened. Hearing their conversation, Reg stopped and asked them to tell him everything in more detail. After that, he and his brother went to their father, and they told him about it. He told Valerian that he asked the head butler and the servants several times, and she really did have magic. Reg said they shouldn't jump to conclusions based on one small event, causing Valerian to call him out angrily, saying his sister had shown magic and that he should be proud of her. He asked if he remembered what she'd done so far, right? Even such a minor result shouldn't be a reason to dismiss the idea of sending her to a monastery. Raymond remained silent and thought about it. Meanwhile, Derek came to teach Diella, but she didn't speak to him and puffed out her cheeks. He asked if she was offended. She told him she was angry, and he said that even if she continued to be naughty, nothing would change. She told him she wasn't being naughty, but angry, and he said that even if she continued to do this, there was nothing they could do. Everything had its order. She turned sharply to him and exclaimed that she had already said that she was angry and was about to hit him, but his cold gaze immediately restrained her, and she became more obedient. He sat down at the table and said that just because her magic had manifested, it did not mean that she could use it as she pleased. Otherwise, it would get out of control. He said this because he himself had been through it. Rest is as important as studying, but she had already rested enough, so now she needed to study. She rolled her eyes and noted that, of course he said that, the boring magic teacher again. He gave her an ominous look and asked if she wanted to learn another way. She remembered that night, and a shudder ran through her. After which, she obediently sat down at the table and told him to forget about it. He said that today they would practice the manifestation of magic. As soon as she could do it freely, then soon she would be able to master the magic of the first star. The School of the Wild doesn't have a rigid teaching system, so it's perfect for independent study. This school strives for much more freedom than the School of Charters, and to be honest, it basically fits the definition of the School of the Wild perfectly. She asked what he meant, and he replied that he meant exactly what he said. Her free-spirited nature fits well with the School of the Wild, and on top of that, she was born into the Duplan family, so she has incredible talent. As soon as the word talent reached her ear, she shyly asked, "Is that true?" He confirmed it and said that if she can create an ice wall in the blink of an eye, then she definitely has a gift. She asked, "Does that mean she's some kind of genius?" He told her that having talent and being a genius are completely different things, to which she objected, but he remained adamant, and she said that she was amazing. They would leave it at that. Meanwhile, Reg stood by the window, listening to their conversation, nervously clenching his teeth. The next day, Diella ran into Derek's room and excitedly said she was able to manifest magic, but she couldn't direct it correctly. The next day arrived, he was calmly eating, and she ran up to him, telling him to look at her mana. She tried to fill it with cold, but something was wrong. A new day dawned. Diela kept running after him, asking him to explain everything to her, and he didn't know where to go, so he went outside to read. But Diela found him there too. She approached him and exclaimed with displeasure. What was he doing here? She told him to stay near the annex. He thinks her father lent him these spellbooks so he could shirk work. He answered that he lent them to him for this very purpose. And she, grabbing his hand, led him back to the annex and said that she managed to release the magic. As he said, so let him check everything quickly. Time passed. Valerian called Derek to him to find out about his sister. They sat down and he asked how Diela was lately. He told her that she had made quite a lot of progress, but mastering the magic of the first star would probably take a little more time. Valerian said that his mother, who had gone to a social event, should return sometime next week, and he would tell him in advance. She was not the kind of person one could relax with. The people in this estate were fine, but aristocrats, by nature, did not like it when commoners occupied important positions. He knew that himself, didn't he? MC replied that he would take that into account. That's why he had invited him. Valerian's face darkened slightly and he rose from his chair, saying that he was the future head of House Duplan, which meant that in this position, he needed to accept and support the members of his house. And to do this, he needed to be sincere with each of them. But it was really difficult, because the human heart was so deep and incomprehensible. It would be great if everyone's thoughts and values were the same, but in reality, things were not like that. Derek asked, so what did he mean by that? Valerian clenched his fist and, after a short pause, turned to him and said with tears in his eyes that Diela didn't want to play with him. A shadow appeared on MC's face. He thought he was talking about something serious, but it was a trifle. Valerian said painfully that he still vividly remembered how she greeted him with a smile when they were younger. Where else in the world could he find such an angel? Was there really no way to win her affection? He asked why he was asking him about this. He answered her that it was because he was the only one Diela constantly followed, after which he took a doll out of his pocket and told him to look at this first. He learned to do this from the maids. He showed him a creepy and ugly doll and asked, doesn't this look like Diela? Through this, you can feel the love of an older brother, right? Derek told him honestly that it looked like he was trying to curse someone, which only made Valerian even more upset and said that he was completely useless in such matters. Days passed, and then the Count's wife, Mariella de Belle Duplan, finally arrived at the residence. She immediately decided to meet Derek, and said with a smile that she had heard a lot about him. They said they had found a very capable tutor for her daughter. She was pleased to finally meet him, and if it was not too much trouble, she would like to send his family a gift from her domain. He replied that he did not belong to any noble house, which made her slightly confused. And when he clarified that he was a commoner, her expression immediately changed. Aseline had left a week earlier, but before that, she had spoken with Derek. She said that she was glad that they had brought him to the Grand Duke's residence. As an older sister, she would like to stay with Diela longer, but she had a lot to do in Ebelstein, so she would leave her to him. He answered that he understood everything, and Jaden patted him on the shoulder, smiling, noting that she said she trusted him with her sister, but his answer was too weak. They both climbed into the carriage, and, as a farewell, the man told him to finish quickly and come back, because if Feline found out about this, she would make a fuss again. Aseline said with a smile that she was counting on him, and then they left. As soon as they set off, she said that she completely forgot about it. Her mother was returning next week, and she forgot to tell him. Jaden asked if he needed to be warned about this. She answered him that her mother, to put it mildly, was like the goddess of wrath. As soon as Mariella found out that her daughter's teacher was a commoner, she stormed into her husband's office and angrily asked what all this meant. He asked her to lower her voice. He could hear her perfectly well, and she exclaimed that that wasn't the problem now. This was Diela. Did he understand? She was their beloved youngest daughter. He replied that as she knew, he didn't really like appointing commoners to positions either, but all the teachers from good families had given up. She asked in return, how could he accept some boy who had been hanging around in the mercenary world? He replied that finding a worthy magic teacher wasn't that easy, and besides, Aseline had recommended him. Mariella clutched her head and said that there had to be some standards. They had his younger brother Flam, right? Last time he said he was busy, but now things are different. Diela also manifested magic, so if he comes and teaches her, then everything will be fine. Raymond asked, does she want to oust the man who manages the estate and make him a private tutor? Does she think the Ebelstein management will work if they treat it so irresponsibly? She exclaimed. Then what about high society? Does he think everything is done haphazardly there too? It's also a battlefield, and for their reputation, the teacher is the most important thing, and their daughter is being taught by a commoner with no last name. Does he want her to become a laughingstock when she debuts in high society? Valerian entered the office and asked his mother to calm down. She didn't come here to quarrel with his father, right? She calmly told him to step aside. They can't just turn a blind eye to this. After all, the question is whether this commoner has the qualities to be Diela's teacher. Raig entered the office and said that she was completely right. She smiled when she saw her son, and he noted that a commoner becoming a noblewoman's tutor was an unusual situation. Of course, if this commoner really had the necessary qualities, he didn't think it would be a big problem. he turned to his father and declared that he would test the abilities of this man named Derek in a magical duel. Raymond didn't let him finish and firmly said that he was a real mage, and Reg frowned, trying to think of another way. He asked, "Then how about testing Diella?" His brother frowned at him, and he continued, saying that if Derek was such an excellent teacher, then Diella, whom he trained, should have achieved excellent results as well. He would personally spar with Diella and test her progress, and the Duke had already agreed to this. Having achieved his goal, Reg left his father's office, and Valerian caught up with him, indignantly asking what he was even thinking about. What magical duel? Reg turned to him and asked if he really believed she had changed. Had he forgotten what she had done? Valerian pointed out that she was still his sister, his own blood. They should be there and protect her. He grinned and shouted in rage that this blood of theirs was trying to destroy their family, as if everything she had done before wasn't enough. If she debuted in high society like this, then they were truly finished. His brother asked if he really thought so. Reg went further and told him that Diella had crossed the line first, and the best thing for her was to be locked in the annex. Valerian watched him leave and clutched his head, but he was serious. Time passed. Diella burst into Derek's room, and he asked what had happened so early. She threw a scroll on his book and said that if she lost this magical duel, he would be fired. He opened the scroll and read it, saying that he had already heard about it. Young Master Reg is already an experienced one-star mage, so it will probably be difficult for her to defeat him. She exclaimed indignantly, "Is that all he can say? He will then be fired." He told her that he is a mercenary. He does the job he was hired for and receives payment for it, that's all. And he has already been paid more than enough. She became slightly upset and asked, did he really think so? 1 week later, a duel was organized, and the entire ducal family came to watch. MC greeted the Duke with a slight bow, and he mentally noted that he did not look nervous at all. Was he really that confident? He maintained such composure in a situation like this, as he thought he should not let him go yet. This will not be an easy magic duel. He took his place. Meanwhile, Reg entered the arena and thought that he would make Diella regret the past to the depths of his soul. At the same time, Diella was also heading to the arena and recalling a recent conversation with her teacher. She asked if he didn't care what happened as long as he got paid. He answered that, as she probably noticed herself, her magical growth had already improved. She wouldn't be able to use the magic of 1 star right away, but it wouldn't take long. This is because Duplain blood flows through her. Already starting to burst into tears, she asked why he suddenly brought this up. He asked if he hadn't told her about it. The School of the Wild is a school where self-study is more important than the transmission of knowledge. She burst into tears and exclaimed indignantly, why was he talking to her like that right now? He remained silent, and she said that she knew she wasn't the best student, but she still wanted to continue learning magic from him. She didn't want anyone else as a teacher. He remained silent, lost in thought, and then said that he didn't know the etiquette or the rules of noble magical duels. He had never participated in them, but he could teach her how to win a fight. She did want to win, didn't she? She remembered how everyone laughed at her for not having magic, how all the teachers had rejected her, and how everyone wondered how something like this could have come from the Duplain family. She was a disgrace to her family. Why were her brothers and sister so capable, while the youngest was such a blockhead? It must be hard for the Grand Duke. It's good that Lady Asseline exists, otherwise his own child would have driven him to his grave. It would be better to have no children at all than to give birth to such a thing. So Diella was determined to win and asked Derek to teach her. She entered the arena, and she came there not as Reg's younger sister, and certainly not as the youngest daughter of House Duplain. She stood there only as Derek's apprentice and a mage. She stood opposite her brother, and the butler cleared his throat, saying that they would use the duel rules for high-ranking mages of the Kelbrem Salon in Ebelstein. The one who first activates the Pelham General Defensive Magic Circle will be declared the loser. And now the duel begins. MC thought that the Pelham General Defensive Magic Circle is an accessory that activates immediately before the wearer receives serious damage, neutralizing the opponent's spells. So this is how aristocrats fight. They use expensive accessories just for the sake of a training fight. It must be nice to be so rich that they can throw money around like that. Duration, 10 minutes. It looks like Reg plans to end this fight early. Reg immediately started with a wind spell, and while he was casting it, she was preparing. After finishing, he mentally apologized to her, but he needed her to return to the outbuilding. After that, he waved his hand and pointed the wind blade at her, but she met it with a confident gaze. Quickly jumping aside, she dodged his blow, and he clenched his teeth in irritation, then swung his arms several times, throwing blades at her, and she continued to run. Derek noted that she handled the magic of the 1st star with ease, but it seemed like she was a complete novice in real combat. Since she changes trajectory to hit, she will burn a lot of mana. She blocked her brother's next strike with an ice wall, and he thought she wasn't even using star rank magic. It was just a display of magical power. She thinks she can block his attack with such a trick. He raised his hand, creating 3 wind spheres, and thought that since it was just a trick, he would break through it with firepower. Let her try blocking this too. Watching him, Diella remembered the training match with Derek. Back then he told her to remember, Mercenaries fight differently from aristocrats. They don't consider honesty and virtue, and their only goal is victory. This is far from a typical aristocratic duel. Even if she wins, she might be condemned for it. Despite this, she can still achieve a victorious ending. Is she really satisfied with this? She excitedly confirmed this, and currently ran out from behind the ice wall, and one of the wind blades skimmed past her face. MC told her that among mercenaries, there are those who always win, even if there's a difference in strength. These people usually don't just duel. They actually fight. And by fighting, he means controlling the battlefield using the terrain and surroundings. They literally use any available means to snatch victory. They must take advantage of even the briefest moment when the enemy lets down their guard. Diela continued to move around the arena, dodging her brother's blows, and when he attacked again, she erected an ice wall. But it was already obvious she was tired. Raig said it was over, and she felt something behind her and turned around, seeing a spell flying at her, followed by a roar and dust rising in the arena. Derek remained calm, and Mariella, frightened, screamed her daughter's name and called out to the butler, exclaiming, "What is he doing? Make him stop the duel immediately. She's injured." Raymond told her to sit down. It wasn't over yet, and she said he saw it himself. She was clearly hit by his blow. Raymond said that wasn't true. Pelham's magic circle hadn't activated. He glanced at Derek and thought he hadn't even blinked. So he already knew she'd grown that much? Raig, meanwhile, had approached the spot where the blow had landed and thought she definitely should have been hit. So why hadn't the magic circle worked? Where had she even gone? He saw a red cloak flash under the hole in the floor, and then an ice block grew out of the floor, almost wounding him. He ran to a safe distance and wondered if it was an attack from under the platform. But according to the rules of the Kelbrim Salon, going beyond the platform should be considered a defeat. He glanced at Delon, who, understanding his thoughts, shook his head. He sighed nervously and thought, is he trying to say that being under the platform doesn't count as going beyond the platform? They probably didn't even imagine that such a pathetic trick would be used in a magical duel between aristocrats. He looked down at the floor. Then another block of ice appeared right beneath him, and he jumped to the side, but there was a piece of ice waiting for him there too. He continued to dodge and became nervous. He didn't see Diela, which meant it would be difficult to hit her. On the other hand, he only needed to land one blow on her. This was a duel without any hint of noble etiquette. He looked through the hole in the floor and saw her gaze and realized that he knew he had seen this somewhere. This unusually calm look, exactly the same as Derek's when his older brother grabbed him by the collar. He glanced at it and thought that Diela couldn't have come up with this on her own. So this was his plan? He threw off his cloak and decided to play along with their plan. Mariella exclaimed. Diela went under the platform right into this dust whirlwind. She turned to her husband and told him to stop the fight immediately, but he objected, since the rules hadn't been broken, and he wanted to watch a little longer. Meanwhile, Diela sat under the platform and carefully looked up, watching the flow of mana. As soon as he cast the spell, she immediately saw his location and struck, but he was able to dodge it, and then he realized that she was aiming for his legs when he began to cast the spell. He couldn't lose like this, so he began to look around for something that would help him. He saw a flagpole nearby, and an idea occurred to him. Diela noticed that the flow of mana had stopped, which meant he was up to something. But no matter what he did, the next time he began to cast a spell, she would get him. Delon at this time looked up, watching the young master. He climbed the flagpole and thought that she shouldn't react to his mana from such a distance. But trying to cast magic from here was impossible, so there was only one way to destroy the entire platform without spells. He fired a magic arrow at the base of the flagpole, breaking it, and flew onto the platform along with the pole. There was a crash. The flagpole made a huge hole in the platform, and Mariella worriedly called out to her son. Raig, meanwhile, was already under the platform. He looked around, and noticing his sister's running silhouette in a cloud of dust, immediately cast a magic arrow spell. She, noticing this, was about to block it, but her mana ran out and she became nervous. The magic arrow was already close. Fortunately, it flew past her, and she continued to quickly move back and forth. Raig thought that in close combat he had the advantage. Just one magic arrow and she would lose. But suddenly Diela appeared right in front of him, and she jumped and kicked him in the chest, knocking the air out of his lungs. And while he was trying to recover, she gathered sand in her fist and threw it in his eyes, then climbed onto the platform. He thought that she was kicking and throwing sand. She was doing everything she could when she had no more mana, and all this was just for the sake of winning, knowing that it was impossible. This duel was a battle to prove her worth. He would answer her in kind and give it his all, like her brother. Meanwhile, she waited for him on the platform. He finally climbed out, and she touched her wounded head, ignoring the blood. MC told her to think of it like brushstrokes on a painting. Mana is the paint, and spellcasting is her brush. She needs to collect the free-floating paint with her brush to create a coherent image. This is magic. When he demonstrated it to her, she was delighted. Now she closed her eyes, focused on his words, and felt mana at her fingertips, telling herself to use paint to draw. This is magic. She created an ice spear. Delon was greatly surprised, and Mariella burst into tears of happiness, telling her husband that she was using the magic of the first star. Raig frowned and thought that she had finally done it, but that did not change anything. Seeing that she was about to attack, He created several magic arrows and thought that he was still one step ahead. Even if she had the magic of the first star, he would hit her before she hit him and win. She waved her hand, throwing a spear at him, and he did the same with the arrows. Their magic collided, forming a powerful magical explosion. Each of their spells made their mother very worried for both of them. Pelham's magic circle became visible in the cloud of dust, meaning one of them had lost. A year ago, the Duke was strolling through his residence, and Delon informed him that a letter had arrived at the estate that morning, apparently concerning an upcoming social event. What would he order him to do with it? The Duke peered into his daughter's room. Diella was sitting on a chair, staring thoughtfully into space. Currently, Diella's gaze was much more lively, and despite everything she had done in the arena, her barrier activated first, and the ice spear missed her brother. Seeing that she had lost, Derek looked down sadly and she began to cry loudly. Mariella was outraged and asked her husband. He calls this dirty and vulgar spectacle a magical sparring match? He wasn't serious. He meant that the so-called teacher taught something similar to the young lady from the Duplan family. Raymond wasn't listening to her at all. He was looking at his daughter and remembering his youth. He was a soldier then, and had the honor of meeting his lordship. He said it was an honor to serve him and participate in the war. And he placed a hand on his shoulder, saying that he had heard a lot about him from his father, his eyes full of ambition. And now, looking at his daughter, he thought that her gaze had become much better. Diella frowned, trying to get her emotions under control, and the maids ran to her, asking if she was okay. They surrounded her and, seeing her wounds, said that she needed immediate help. But she only waved them off and went to her brother. He awkwardly looked away and praised her, to which she responded only with a brief nod, after which she left the arena. The maids rushed after her, offering to take her to her quarters, but she ignored them. She walked up to Derek, stood frozen in front of him, not daring to speak up, and then burst into tears again, saying she lost and was so sorry. He looked at her with his usual calm gaze, then consoled her with the words that it was okay, losing was normal, and that she should use this frustration to rise higher and become stronger. His words made her cry even more and start bawling loudly. The maids didn't know what to do or how to help her. Then Mariella walked up to her daughter and said she couldn't believe she had gone through that. It had been so hard for her all this time. She hugged her tightly and said that everything was okay now and that she should go and get treatment soon. She agreed and left with the maids, and Mariella wiped her tears and furiously walked towards Derek. She called him a vulgar brat and asked if he even understood what he had done. Did he teach her the magic of the first star? Does he really think that makes him a good teacher? She slapped him and said that he only taught her cheap tricks and tarnished the noble Lily. He forced the daughter of a great duke to do something dirty and obscene. She hit him again and screamed that there is a world that trash like him doesn't even know about. Values worth protecting. One must have at least a shred of dignity. Seeing the Duke walking towards them, she called out to him and asked, he saw this too, right? This isn't even a magical sparring. He taught Diella something so terrible. But instead of an answer, she received a slap from him, which she clearly did not expect. And he asked, doesn't she understand who is behaving the most vulgarly here right now? She stared at him in confusion and asked why. This man is just a commoner. Raymond said that it was true. He is a worthless commoner, but he is their daughter's teacher. What parent in the world treats their child's teacher like that? He approached Derek and apologized for her behavior. Everyone has their own way of loving their child. He told him that everything was fine and suggested that he go to the reception area. There was something they needed to discuss in private. Seeing this commoner leaving with her husband, Mariella was furious. When they entered his office, he said that he had raised Diella magnificently. As the master of this estate, he should provide him with a corresponding reward, the highest level available to a commoner. He wants 3rd-star magic, right? MC thought he had hit the nail on the head. He knew his profession even better than he did, and was making an offer specifically for him. This was a 5th-star mage, the Grand Duke of their country, and when an opportunity arises, it must be seized. He honestly answered him that this was what he wanted. Raymond said that he had taught Diella 1st-star magic well, but in high society, this achievement was not enough to survive. Derek said that the duchy is full of people who can mentor Lady Diella. Now that she has grasped the essence, she will grow quickly. Raymond said that his daughter does not need an instructor, but a teacher, and he, as a commoner, harbors ambitions so great that he is not even allowed to dream of. He knows how offensive this must be to these arrogant nobles, right? He is willing to turn a blind eye to it just because it is him. MC thought that the Grand Duke did not talk to him that much, and yet he knows that he is looking beyond the 3rd star, towards the 4th and even higher, which makes this man even more frightening. The Duke said that if he really made this decision, he cannot stay in such a place for long. He is already ready to leave, right? He confirmed this, and Raymond said that he is aware of his ambitions, but he still must teach Diella a little more, and that is when he offered him this reward, 3rd-star magic. After leaving the office, Derek immediately went to the library. He took a book from the shelf and quickly flipped through it, thinking that it was quite impressive. Many people spend their entire lives trying to get at least one 2nd-star spellbook. and here there were only third-star spellbooks. This was more than enough to linger in this place a little longer, and then he remembered Jaden's words. If Feline found out about this, there would be a lot of noise. Time passed. Diella came to Derek and boasted to him that she was now a first-star mage. He said that even if it was only once when she used first-star magic, she could probably really be called a first-star mage. She smiled proudly, expecting even more praise, but she didn't hear another word from him, and indignantly asked, "Is that all? His student made progress, and he wasn't happy?" He answered her that it wasn't he who earned this achievement, and she sighed heavily, noting that it really wasn't easy. He said that it seemed like she had recovered well over the past 3 days. Then it seemed to him that she had cried her eyes out. She immediately denied it out of embarrassment, saying that she was just blinded by dust, and her dad should have told her earlier. She thought he would be kicked out. He finished reading the book and suggested that she begin the lesson. She is growing quickly, so she will soon master other spells of the first star. Hearing this, she turned to him with a smile and asked what he said. How is she growing? He repeated that she is growing quickly. It is not often that she manages to use star magic so soon after manifesting mana. She was very happy and enthusiastically asked what they should start with. The magic arrow looked quite convenient. It is possible to conjure it without a spell, or the wind blade that Reg used. That also looked very strong, although that ice spear was amazing too. If she trains a little more, she will even be able to hit her brother. MC told her she would be training in magic manifestation, which disappointed her, and asked if they weren't learning the spells of the first star. He told her that there were many reasons, but ultimately, the basics were most important. Simply put, it all came down to mana. She was upset but didn't object. If he said so, then so be it. She shouldn't have been so happy. She thought they would be learning the spells of the first star. He remained silent, and she asked why he was looking at her like that. Was there something on her face? He told her it was simply amazing to see her obey so obediently. She immediately looked away proudly and asked who he took her for. She had respected his words from the very beginning. He reminded her that she poured dirty water on his head, even twice. This made her feel ashamed, and she asked if he still remembered it. He answered her that such things are hard to forget, and she, deciding to change the subject, laughed awkwardly and said that the weather was so great today. The manifestation of magic sounded fun, and she wanted to start practicing as soon as possible. Watching her, he smiled, and they began the lesson. They finished when the moon was already in the sky. Diella lay down on the grass, trying to come to her senses, and Derek said that he heard she would become more busy. He sat down next to her, and she asked, "Does that mean he already knows about it?" She was told that starting next week, she would have etiquette and general education lessons. He asked, "Isn't that good?" She mastered the magic of the first star. Now she will receive a real noble education. She told him that she is not happy at all. Basic butler etiquette, foreign languages, geography, history, botany, piano, sewing. She doesn't understand why she needs to learn all this. And how did Aseline put up with all this? MC pointed out that this is why they call her the Duplin Flower, and this is why she is at the center of Ebelstein High Society. Diella said that she just wants to study magic, and he told her that there are no obstacles for her. His lordship hired him, so they have enough leeway. She said that she is not sure that they will really have that much time, and he asked if there is anyone who will kick him out now. She grinned and told him that obviously there is such a person. Her father acknowledged him, but her mother is not the type to let it go. He asked why she wants to kick him out. She looked thoughtfully at the sky and answered him that she was probably worried that by studying with him she would lose her noble dignity and end up like a mercenary. Even looking at that sparring match, it lacked the dignity that nobles strive for. Derek thought for a moment, and after a short pause, said that then it was nothing. Silencing Madame wasn't as difficult as she thought. She just needed to deprive her of an excuse. Diella was very interested in his words. The next day arrived, and Mariella wandered sadly through the residence, thinking about her daughter and the barbarian who was teaching her. She had already imagined how, under his tutelage, she herself would become a mercenary, kidnapping people, behaving barbarically, and so on. She clutched her head and sighed heavily, then walked to the door and thought, what could this worthless man teach her? Even if her husband acknowledged him, she was, after all, the mistress of this estate. One way or another, she would find a way to get him out of here. Stepping out into the courtyard, she met her daughter and, smiling, spread her arms for a hug, thinking that even if people said she was acting like a child, she liked the way she ran into her arms and smiled. She closed her eyes, ready to hug her, but feeling nothing, she opened them in bewilderment, and her daughter, curtsying, politely asked if she had rested well the night before. Mariella was very surprised by this, and Diella said that she hadn't been able to leave the outbuilding while she was healing her wounds, and she was so sorry she had missed the opportunity to talk to her properly. There was so much she wanted to talk to her about, but unfortunately, she had a piano lesson this morning. Mariella, slightly confused, said she understood, and her daughter, bowing slightly again, said she would go first, as she had a busy general education schedule. Mariella asked, she hasn't started etiquette lessons yet, right? They start next week. Diella smiled just like Aseline and confirmed it. Thanks to her thoughtfulness, she was looking forward to these lessons. Mariella's behavior made her slightly confused and told her to hurry to class. Diella then leisurely continued on her way. The maid, seeing her behavior, dropped her entire hand in shock. She asked with a smile, "She's not hurt, is she? I hope she doesn't overexert herself like that." The poor and frightened girl stared at her in shock, just like everyone else. Time passed, and the young ladies gathered for tea in the noble quarter of Ebelstein. One of them turned to Aseline and said that she was so worried at the last meeting because she looked so depressed and worried. She asked in surprise, "Is this true?" She didn't want to worry her. Most of her worries have been resolved, so she feels much better now. Elente Alfione, the second daughter of House Belmiard, smiled and said that it was such a relief. When she heard about what happened, that she left the noble quarter to save someone, she was so scared. Aseline smiled and thanked her for her concern. To be honest, her younger sister needed a magic teacher. She was a bit busy since she went to look for him personally. Elente thought, she went to look for someone personally? What does that mean? How incredible must this teacher be if the young lady from House Duplan was looking for him personally? The second daughter of House Veltus, Denise Linier, asked, "Is she talking about her younger sister Diella?" Aseline confirmed this. She had seen Diella at the estate not long ago, and she had become such a well-mannered lady that she hardly recognized her. She even developed first-star magic and behaved so carefully and restrainedly that she herself wanted to try harder. Denise thought it was strange. She herself had mentioned her sister. Hadn't Duplan been hiding her? She smiled and said that it seemed she had found a good magic teacher, and she agreed with her. He had no status, but he must be exceptionally capable. It was good that she had gone to the Beldern mercenaries to find him personally. The two were confused upon hearing about the mercenary, and Elente wondered if it wasn't because of Diella that their cook had fled from Duplan. She still remembered how he cried with happiness upon his return, calling her kind. Just think, the teacher not only rehabilitated this notorious rude girl, but also made a top-notch mage out of her. She smiled and asked if she could know the name of this magic teacher. If he was Lady Diella's teacher, he would become even more famous in the future, so she wanted to know his name in advance. Aseline answered her with a smile that his name was Derek. At this time, Diella was talking to her mother and telling her that Derek was also teaching her a little etiquette. Learning it on your own was really difficult. Mariella forced a smile and remarked that it was commendable that she was learning on her own, to which she replied that it wasn't that she learned on her own, rather that Derek taught her. Mariella asked what was difficult about learning on her own, and she answered with a smile that almost everything was difficult. But she could at least do this, thanks to Derek. She smiled irritably and thought she was only talking about him. When she left the room after talking to her, she could no longer contain her furious grin, and wondered how many times this name would come up. She didn't know what he had done to Diella, but she couldn't let it go. There had to be a way out. So she decided to ask the servants about her daughter. The maid answered that she had been so kind to the servants lately, had become so gentle, and the gardener said that she had been in a great mood lately. She had changed so much in just a few weeks. Delon said that all this was truly amazing, because he had only seen such behavior in Aseline. Maybe she was finally trying to transform into a true lady. Now she felt a noble dignity. Mariella was furious. She couldn't find an excuse to kick Derek out of there. Night fell, and he came to the meadow as usual to practice his magic. He opened the book in front of him, sat down, and began slowly gathering mana. He then extended his hand and clenched his teeth with the effort, but to no avail. He sighed heavily, fell onto the grass, and, hearing a rustling sound behind him, turned around. Raig waved and apologized. Had he interrupted his training? He replied that was not the case. What brought him here? Raig sat down next to him and said that he wanted to talk a little about Diella, but right now, he was interested in something else. Wasn't this a spellbook for third-star magic? He confirmed it. His lordship had lent it to him. Raig was surprised, and MC said that this level was difficult for him now, but there was no harm in studying it beforehand. Raig recalled his father's words in defense of Derek, that he was a true mage, and noted with confusion that it was all quite impressive. MC asked, so what did he want to talk about regarding Lady Diella? He looked away and sheepishly said that it was actually a bit complicated. What do teenage girls like these days? He remained silent, and he asked if he could make a doll like her. Would she like it? Derek remembered the doll Valerian made and firmly told him not to. Raig smiled awkwardly and said that he thought so. Not that he was planning to do it or anything. He doesn't think it's a good idea either. It was very awkward, so he stood up and suggested that he go back if he was done training. They headed towards the estate, and he said that in any case, he was grateful to him. The atmosphere in the house has been good lately. Even Valerian has focused on managing the territory, and his father, although he doesn't show it, looks pleased. MC noted that his lordship's feelings are difficult to read, and he laughed, saying that everyone in this mansion would agree with that. He stopped and looked at the sky, saying that he, too, should accept that people can change, especially children at that age. He doesn't know if he didn't realize it before or was just avoiding it, but since Diella has changed, he thinks he should change too. He turned to Derek and said with a smile that it's all thanks to him. He just nodded silently in response, and Raig, waving his hand, tried to imitate his sister's movements and said that her magic felt somehow different. He asked, so did he finally notice the difference? Raig told him that it was like painting a picture, He thought that a genius is a genius. He really is Duplang. It must be difficult to notice this difference. He said that Diella uses mana control from the School of Wildlife, and he said that he heard about it. MC continued, saying that the way each person uses mana is very different. Once she gets into the right groove, she will learn on her own and will not need his help. At this level, the teacher's intervention can actually become a hindrance. Reg noted that sooner or later, her time to shine will come. 2 months passed. In the morning, Diella was getting ready to go to class as usual, and while the maid was braiding her hair, she noticed flowers on the nightstand and asked what they were for. She answered with a smile that they had bloomed so beautifully, so she brought them to decorate her hair. Diella brought the flowers to her nose and inhaled their fragrance with a smile, saying that they smelled quite nice. It feels like spring has been going on for months now. She can even use the magic of the first star freely, and she's become much closer with the servants. It feels like she's missed so much during all this time, and it's all thanks to Derek. The maid said she was wondering why she looked so happy today. Is today the day of the magic lesson? She confirmed it and asked if she really looked like that. The maid said that she should then beautifully weave flowers into her hair, and she asked her to give her one so that she could give it to Derek. But when she came to him for another lesson, shocking news awaited her. With tears in her eyes, she asked what he meant. He answered that she heard him. He had nothing more to teach her. Such are the laws of the seasons. Just as there is no eternal winter, so there is no eternal spring. The protagonist found himself in Raymond's office and informed him that his grace had likely noticed as well. But Lady Diella belonged to the school of savagery. Among them, her traits were particularly pronounced. Further meddling would only break her wings. Raymond replied that he understood everything and therefore had no reason to remain in this mansion. Derek confirmed that everything was correct, and at that moment, Raymond fell silent and stood up abruptly. He bowed and said that thanks to him, much had changed, and thanks to him, his daughter had been able to grow up. He had been so absorbed in managing the territory that he hadn't been a good father, but now he felt calmer. He silently looked up and asked when Derek was leaving. Derek replied that he had heard that Lady Aseline would soon visit the mansion and then return to Ebelstein. He planned to go with her in her carriage. Raymond understood, and he asked for his library key back immediately. Derek replied that he would return the spell books he was currently reading and pass the key on to the head butler. Raymond noted that there was no need for that. He should return the key now. Derek paused, and Raymond said that if he had nothing else, he could go. The protagonist stared silently at the floor, then suddenly stood up, bowed, and left the office. As he walked down the hallway, he encountered Diella, who remarked that he had appeared out of nowhere and was disappearing into nowhere again. He addressed her by name and said there was nothing he could do about it. Diella put her hands behind her back and replied that she knew he wouldn't listen to her, but she will say it anyway. She became embarrassed and asked again, "Can't he stay?" Derek looked at her silently, then took a step toward her and said that, as always, he would return to the life of a mercenary and also diligently study magic. And when Lady Diella becomes more skilled, she will go to Ebelstein for her debut. Diella lowered her gaze sadly, and Derek said that then they could meet again. If his level rises a little more by then, he'll be able to teach her something new. Diella replied that he's simply unbearable. He always says the right things, so she has nothing to say in response. Sometime later, night fell, and Diella fell asleep. She had a terrible dream, where horrible people turned to her and called her a useless child, completely incompetent. What could she boast of except her pedigree? She has no talent whatsoever. She's a disgrace to the Duplin house. People like her shouldn't have been born. At that moment, she suddenly opened her eyes and began breathing heavily from the fear she experienced. She cried out. No, she was trying to come to her senses. She grabbed her head and realized it was just a nightmare. And at that moment, a maid burst in and asked if she was okay. She just heard a scream. Did something happen? Diella looked into her eyes and wondered if she could make an excuse, maybe slap her again like before, throw a tantrum and cause trouble, and then Derek would stay here for her, right? The maid came closer and asked again, was she okay or not feeling well? Diella pressed her lip, then answered, no, and realized she wouldn't do that again. She replied that everything was fine and that she shouldn't worry. Diella understood that this wouldn't add value to her, so she decided to put those thoughts aside. When a new day dawned, Aseline got into the carriage and asked Derek if it would be okay if she dropped him off at the shopping district. Derek replied that he would appreciate it. Aseline smiled and told him to go and say goodbye. They would be leaving soon. Derek turned to see all his friends who were seeing him off. Valerian approached him and asked with a smile, so, is he really leaving? Derek replied that he should return to where he came from. Reg also noted that life in the mansion must have been difficult, and he had worked hard all this time. Valerian also said that if anything happened, he should definitely contact him, as he would help in any way he could. Derek looked up and thanked them, then silently looked at Diella, who was also silently looking at him. It was clear she was very angry, and Derek continued to stare at her. She exclaimed, why is he looking at her like that? He thought she would beg him not to leave. He shouldn't misunderstand, but she was no longer a child. Derek smiled and replied that it had been an honor to teach her, and that he couldn't proudly call himself her teacher, but he hoped she would remember the magic she learned with him. Diela smiled and apologized to him, then said she would proudly say he was her teacher. He knew he couldn't live peacefully anymore, right? After all, he was the teacher of the great Diela. He looked at her silently, and at that moment, Diela almost burst into tears and told him to take care of himself and not do anything senseless or dangerous and not to get into trouble. After these words, she immediately turned away so no one could see her embarrassment. He replied that he would be fine and asked her to please not overdo it either. Diela frowned and replied that she was already an adult and could take care of herself. At that moment, he remembered the words Katya had spoken to him in his childhood, and she hugged him and told him to remember her words. At that moment, he remained silent, then abruptly turned to her, stroked her head, and told her that she didn't need to grow up so early. She teared up after these words and turned away, then wiped away her tears. And Derek went to get into the carriage. Suddenly, he heard his name, and Diela shouted that they would see each other again. He bowed to her in response and said that they would meet again in Ebelstein. Lady Diela. She couldn't hold back her tears and replied, okay. Sometime later, in the Ebelstein shopping district, people were beating a guy who was lying on the ground. Derek appeared in the room and saw everything that was happening there, including all the blood. When the mercenary feline turned to him, she exclaimed his name. He smiled and realized he had returned home. Sometime later in the Belden Tears Tavern, the protagonist found himself with Feline, and Jaden said that it was the honey wine nobles always put on airs with, but he used to love it. It was a welcome drink on the house. Derek thanked him for it, and Feline asked, was he always this pale? Has he grown even paler after living like a noble? Derek looked at her questioningly, and Feline continued saying that when she heard he'd become a magic teacher, she'd assumed the nobles there had all been drinking something. So what happened? Let him tell her. Derek replied that he just worked there, and there wasn't much to tell. Feline was surprised and noted that he sounded just like a nobleman. Would it hurt him to tell? Jaden told her to stop and let her drink it. Feline exclaimed that it infuriated her, because she'd gone through the hell of working alone while he was gone. Jaden noted that thanks to that, Derek must have brought home a ton of money, right? Well, did they pay well? He replied that he'd gotten something more important than money, and Jaden looked at him questioningly. Derek looked at the book, and Jaden asked, what is it? Is this a 2nd-star spellbook? Feline noted that it was a very rare book, and he replied, no, it's a 3rd-star spellbook. Jaden exclaimed, did he steal this? If he gets caught, he's finished. Feline exclaimed, I don't care what he stole, it's a spellbook. She wants to steal one too. Where is it? The protagonist looked at them silently and said that the Grand Duke gave it to him. Feline started screaming. What? He shouldn't lie, the little bastard. Don't they by any chance need a bow hunting instructor there? Let him answer. After a while, they calmed down, and Derek asked if they'd had any orders lately. Jaden replied, he's taking orders, even though he just got back. Derek replied, yes, if it's something easy, like a simple cleanup, then he feels like he's lost his touch a little. Jaden replied, okay, as if he'd ever lost his touch. There's always a shortage of mages in their line of work. If he wants to work, then let him do it, because there's a lot of work. Derek replied that then he wants to start tomorrow, as soon as possible. The next day, he was already riding in a carriage with Feline. They began fighting, and a huge ogre chased after her. Once they destroyed the creature, they turned to new monsters and spent the entire day like that. They went to sleep in the forest, right on the ground, making a bed around a fire. But that night, Derek rose and began using his magical powers and training. He created a magic crystal in his hand, but suddenly it was thrown far away, and there was a loud explosion. He fell to the ground and tried to catch his breath, thinking that he had mostly mastered the spell for the 2nd star, but the wall in the path of the 3rd star was really high. So time passed, and after summer came autumn and then winter. And in the winter cold, the guys entered the establishment, and Feline noted how very cold it was outside, and wondered how much colder it could get. Jaden greeted them and said it was good to be young. He'd driven up the mountains and back in this weather. Feline sneezed and replied that she'd told him to go when it warmed up. And Jaden noted that dragging a harpy's head in this weather, no one but them, the crazies, could do it. Derek wiped the blood from his face and said, thank you. Feline was surprised she was alive again. Jaden decided that since they'd worked so hard, they'd probably rest tomorrow. Incidentally, a request had come in that would suit him perfectly. Derek, the protagonist, asked again what the request was. He replied that it was expensive and easy, although it could be a bit of a hassle. This request had come from the Rohal Mercenary Corps on the West Street. Had he heard of Count Belmiard? They were simply looking for people to help with magical sparring, and, roughly speaking, they needed a punching bag. He just went, took a few hits, and that was it. Derek found himself in the magical sparring arena in the Noble District. 2 people approached him, and the girl asked who she was sparring with today. The man replied that they had arranged for attack practice with a commoner. It was Elenti who asked, what? He meant she had to beat up a commoner now? The man replied that this was also part of her training, and they had promised the commoner decent compensation so she could train to her heart's content. She replied, well, of course, so it's the practice of beating a commoner half to death. That's what typical nobles do. The teacher replied that he possessed 1st-star magic, after all. She asked again, teacher? She'll soon have a 2nd star, right? The difference between 1st and 2nd stars is as vast as heaven and earth. Meanwhile, Derek was preparing for the competition and suddenly heard someone approach him. It was Elenti who asked if he was her sparring opponent today. He stated his name and bowed. Elente also told him her name and thought she'd heard it many times before. The teacher replied, okay, now they should go to the arena. Elente realized he was indeed a mage, but why did he look so young? She stretched her body and walked closer to Derek, standing in front of him. Then she said, so, is he familiar with the basic etiquette of magical sparring? Derek replied that he knew the basics, and Elente said, okay, let him resist with all his might, and she'll try to finish it quickly. She understood that she would do it if necessary, but if she threw him out of the arena with a shockwave, it would all be over in the blink of an eye. Derek said resist with all his might, but how much resistance did she expect? She replied, what kind of ridiculous question? Derek said all he needs to know is how much he needs to resist to be useful to her. At that moment, the teacher lowered his gaze, and Elente grinned and said that he was talking funny, but as she had said, let him resist with everything he had. He looked at her silently and replied, fine, he'll do as she commands. At that moment, they began using their magic powers and looked at each other. Elente cast her spell and extended her hand toward her opponent. She thought that this commoner boy deserved praise for having achieved the rank of first star at such a young age, but he was overconfident. She would make him realize the gulf between aristocrats and commoners. At that moment, Elente whispered a special spell and attempted to hit Derek with a shockwave, but he easily repelled this attack, deftly dodging it. She was surprised by this and grimaced in confusion. Derek looked at her silently and then asked, what will be the next attack? These words angered her, and she realized that he seemed to have reason for such confidence, but that didn't mean the wall between them had crumbled. She continued chanting, and at that moment, sharp magical arrows began to emerge from the ground. Elente pounced on Derek, thinking his confidence would be shattered. As she rained arrows down on him, Derek immediately used his magic stone, which destroyed all her arrows with a single blow. Elente was stunned and realized it was a simple spell, but he was capable of controlling it to such a degree. The teacher, observing from the sidelines, realized that for a commoner, this level of magic was simply superb, and it seemed his claims of being an experienced mercenary were not empty words. Elente frowned and admitted she had underestimated him. This time, she would attack him seriously. Then she chanted an even more ominous spell, and Derek realized she had changed tactics. She wasn't trying to hit him, and was planning to destroy the entire duel arena. For an aristocrat, such adaptability was impressive. She raised her hand and unleashed fiery magic arrows, which began to spin toward Derek with incredible speed. He realized there was no way to dodge them, so he created a magical barrier against which the arrows shattered. A moment later, a powerful explosion rocked the arena, creating a cloud of dust. Derek looked up and was stunned to see her lashing out at him with incredible force. He realized it was an ice spear, a dead end. At such a distance, it was impossible not to dodge or even create a barrier. Her talent was simply insane. At that moment, he stopped everything and blinded Elente. She cried out, wondering where the brat had gone, seeing nothing. She wanted to concentrate because if she listened carefully, she could react quickly, if only she could pinpoint where he was. At that moment, a bright beam of light flashed past her, and she realized she had just flashed past. She hadn't heard anything. At that moment, Derek actually hit her with his spell, and she realized it was magic. People who absorb sound. He'd even calculated that she'd rely on hearing. So this was the first attack that missed. So how dare he give in to it? Derek continued attacking her, and Elente mentally exclaimed, no way. She abruptly pulled her hand back, but suddenly tensed even more when Derek appeared right in front of her, and she realized he was closing the distance. Quickly manifesting magic was her forte, so she should concentrate as soon as the magic appeared in his hand. It would work faster, and she would be done with this. Derek stopped abruptly in front of her, and she was dumbfounded when she saw bright magical sparks under his soul. His fingers emitted magic, which surprised her. She tried to protect herself and pulled her hands back, then fell to the ground. The teacher watched in surprise and realized he was impressed, as he seemed to be from the school of savagery, but he couldn't read the flow. According to the school's regulations, that was difficult to keep up with. Elente scratched her head and was surprised. He really is an interesting boy. She'd be honest, at first she'd looked down on him, thinking he was just a boastful liar. She approached him and, bowing, said he'd shown her something interesting, so she thanked him. At that moment, she struck the ground with magical light and lunged at Derek, but he was also prepared and swung his right hand sharply to the left. Elente felt the bright light again and tried to avoid the attack, when suddenly Derek rose high above her and looked her in the eye. She became frightened and began screaming loudly. At that moment, the teacher rang the bell and stopped the training. Derek landed and thanked her for the duel. Elente looked at him sheepishly and remained silent, not responding. After a while, Elente sat down at the table and said he was a magnificent mage. Derek responded, "What's she talking about?" She had an incredible reaction, the kind he'd never seen before. She replied that judging by how skillfully he flattered her, he was already accustomed to life in this world. Although she'd heard he was a commoner, judging by his skills, he'd owned them with incredible effort. He replied that he needed to survive, as he was a mercenary. Elente asked him to put aside his modesty, as she liked hardworking people. But that old magic teacher behind her, he probably wouldn't like him, so he should try not to anger him unnecessarily. Well, she thanked him, as she'd learned a lot. Next time, there would be another ceremonial duel at the Rose Salon, and perhaps she'd even achieve a good result there. He replied that, with her skills, he thought she had nothing to worry about. Elenta noted that this might be true, but she wasn't interested in trivialities, and the person she truly wanted to defeat was Aseline. When he heard this, he remained silent, and she said she chatted too much, so he could go. He bowed and left her. At that moment, Elente continued drinking tea and mused. Derek, from the mercenary squad, she seemed to have heard that name before. She heard that name from Aseline, and when she remembered it, she froze. She caught up with the protagonist, grabbed his hand and looked him in the eye. He frowned, and Elente asked, "Isn't he the mercenary who trained Aseline?" Sometime later, evening arrived, and the boys lit a fire in the fireplace. Elente asked to get straight to the point. If she could defeat Aseline, she'd do anything. Derek asked, "Does she want to defeat her?" Elente noted that yes, she still hadn't become a second-star mage, and it would be better if she reached that rank first, but if all else failed, she wanted to at least defeat her this time in a magical duel. Derek said she had an incredibly competitive spirit, and Elente asked, "Competitive spirit?" How beautifully he called it. Of course, now it could be called a competitive spirit, and before, she wanted to defeat her so badly that she wouldn't hesitate to resort to even baseness. Jealousy is a dirty, pathetic emotion. She envied her, and it didn't lead to anything good, no matter how much she gossiped behind her back and tried to find flaws in her. Aseline only tried to understand and accept her. Derek asked why she was telling him all this. She put the mug on the table and said she wanted him to see her sincerity, even if it meant exposing her shameful side, and that she had something she wanted to ask. He asked her to please do so, and Elente replied that since he lived in the Duplain house, he should know perfectly well how strong she was and what she was capable of. That's why she asks, what does she need to do to defeat her? Derek silently looked into her eyes, then said that it was true that Lady Aseline's skill was at an astonishing level, but she also possessed extraordinary abilities. So if she worked hard on herself, sometimes you could read a person's heart in their eyes, and this young lady in front of him wasn't asking him about this because she was thirsty for praise. She was simply desperate, and she was so desperate that she was ready to seek an answer even from a lowly mercenary. They continued talking, and suddenly Derek said that there was no way she could defeat her. Elente looked into his eyes, and a silence fell between them, when suddenly she expressed sadness on her face and said that she longed for this with all her heart. Even if it was impossible, she would win. At that moment, she was surprised and said that he had made that useless Diella a mage, which meant he could make her defeat Aseline too, right? He silently looked at her and said that it wasn't that there weren't any methods worth trying, but before they started eating the things that bothered him. She sat back down and said that was another matter. What were those things? Derek replied that, firstly, she knew exactly how he had trained Lady Diella. He recalled some fragments from their past, and Elente replied that she didn't know the details, but that he shouldn't worry, because she would do anything to win. Derek frowned and added that, secondly, as she knew, he was a mercenary, which meant, but before he could finish his sentence, Elente suddenly asked, so that's what he was worried about. Was he worried that rumors would spread and people would mock the fact that nobles were learning magic from a mercenary? He should listen to her, because she was speaking seriously now. She was going to become someone whose name would thunder throughout the empire. If she couldn't even take first place in Ebelstein's social circles, then that was simply laughable, so he shouldn't dare judge her sincerity for such a trivial reason. She knew perfectly well that there were things more important than pride. Derek replied, no, he says that if this is the case, then she will have to pay him. She was surprised and dumbfounded, then blushed and said, so that's what he meant. Of course, she'll pay him whatever he wants. Derek realized that if she was serious, then he should respond in kind and resort to harsh methods. After some time, Aseline announced that there would be a magical duel at the next meeting, and she'd heard that Lady Elente had become even more skilled, so she also needed to train hard. The girls next to her were discussing the next meeting, which was very soon, and they definitely had to be there. At that moment, Elente approached her and said, Lady Aseline, she's so modest. Elente was surprised by her appearance and said, Lady Elente, she's here too. She had just been talking about her, and Elente replied that she knew, because her voice could be heard from far away. Aseline's friends decided not to interfere, and Elente asked again, does she need to prepare too? She hasn't lost a single fight lately, and they call her the flower of the Duplain house. Aseline thanked her for the compliment and said that since she was her rival, she couldn't let her guard down. Did she understand? Elente replied that she had actually hired a new mentor, so she was now quite confident. He was a commoner, but his skills were excellent, so she decided to hire him. Aseline replied, my God, since she vouched for him so much, it must be that she trusts him very much. She chuckled and replied that, to be precise, it wasn't she, but Aseline herself, who trusted him. Aseline asked again what that meant. She replied that this mentor's name was Derek. At that moment, Aseline was dumbfounded, her face twisted in bewilderment. LNT mentally mocked her. Let everyone just look at those eyes. She was confused and upset, wasn't she? She had managed to achieve what she couldn't Aseline muttered, "Oh my god, she's congratulating her." As she already knew, he truly is a reliable person, someone she could trust. Aseline congratulated her sincerely once again and, embarrassed, grabbed her hand. LNT thanked her in return and realized she hadn't expected that reaction at all. At that moment, Aseline reflected on her past and asked Diella if she could also ask Derek to teach her magic, since her progress had slowed recently, and she thought she could trust him with her training. Diella started waving her hands and replied that there was no need, since unless it was absolutely necessary, she didn't need to do it, and that she was very dear to her. Aseline thought about it, and LNT understood. That's exactly it. Now that she thought about it, she understands what it means to her that Derek is now with her. Let her be angry as much as she wants, because he belongs to her. Derek is LNT's mentor. At that moment, Aseline spoke, "Lady LNT." Derek seemed a bit off, but before she could finish, LNT suddenly asked, "Is it really that late?" Their conversation was very pleasant, as today was her first day of classes and she had to go. Afterwards, she mockingly said goodbye to Aseline, who mused that she hoped nothing bad would happen, since Derek was a good man after all. As they said their goodbyes, they passed Denise, who was sitting at a table drinking tea outside. She realized they were also working hard. Sometime later, at the tavern, Derek came to Jaden and informed her that this was just the way things had turned out for now. For now, he plans to focus on their assignments. He asked again, "Belmiard House?" It seemed the scope of his work was constantly expanding. Derek remarked that it was convenient that he didn't have to travel to their estate if he could do it in Ebelstein. Jaden remarked that it was easier said than done. Was it even possible to defeat Lady Aseline in a duel? She replied that it wasn't entirely impossible, but if Lady LNT reached 2nd star rank, no matter how talented she was, the difference in stars would simply overwhelm her. Jaden asked him to listen, as he'd heard enough of this talk. But was there any real way? He replied that this real way was precisely why he needed his help. Jaden tensed after such a request, and Derek said that Feline needed him too, as a backup. Jaden looked at him silently and then asked, "He was thinking of something dangerous, not realistic, right?" He replied that reality itself was dangerous, and at that moment Feline began screaming with tears in her eyes. "That's right, it's dangerous, those bastards deceived her. She'd fallen into a trap, completely duped." The guys turned to her silently, and Jaden said, "Okay, let him take her with him." After a while, Derek found himself with LNT in the arena. And first, they would conduct a lesson in dueling. They'll do 10 repetitions, then move on to more complex magic. Elente chuckled. "He'll have 10 duels in a row without a break before or after?" He replied that he'd first test her skills in a real fight. She replied that he was quite happy, even considering he'd trained as a mercenary. Well, she wouldn't refuse after all. She hadn't hired him for history lessons or anything like that. Derek noted that in that case, he'd start, and a moment later, the arena was slightly damaged. Elente was very tired and clutched her knees, and Derek thanked her for her work and that she should take a 10-minute break and review basic magical techniques. Elente was surprised that he was only giving her 10 minutes, but she had no mana left. Derek replied that if she tried hard enough, she could find some. She didn't react at all, after which Derek said that it wasn't an ice spear and that she should concentrate and create 10 more ice spears. She tried her best and gritted her teeth in anger, and Derek asked if she couldn't even do that. Then what was she even counting on? She had 5 shots left. Then she had to create 100 magic arrows, and Elente replied that she had no more mana. Derek asked her to stop making excuses and make the next stream of arrows now. After a while, she finally fell to the floor and tried to catch her breath. Derek lowered his gaze and said that she had worked hard and could now have dinner. He asked again, was she okay? If it was too hard, giving up was also a good option. When Elente heard these words, she immediately stood up and asked again, giving up over such a trifle? Before they began, he spoke as if it was something serious, but it was just physical exertion. He doesn't understand what she went through to survive in Abelstein high society. Their training is nothing. Derek replied, clearly, he was short-sighted. Elente stood up and said she was just a little tired after today's meeting and would be able to give it her all tomorrow, so tomorrow they should increase the intensity even more at this level, and frankly, it wasn't even training. Derek asked again, she means tomorrow? What does she mean? Elente asked again, what? Derek replied that he thought he mentioned it, that they were currently having an evening lesson. At that moment, silence fell between them, and Elente said that his jokes were funny, and Derek replied that he hadn't received any requests for jokes. When a new day arrived, it began with training. Derek told Lady Elente that she was capable of more. Only 5 more magic arrows. Elente tried her best, but her strength was already waning, and she groaned. Derek said that she still had mana left in her body. She should survive 10 arrows. Elente screamed, why is he increasing the number? Derek replied that if she couldn't run any longer, they would move on to magic training. Elente said she was running after him, and when she sat down on the chair, she was trying to catch her breath, although she was extremely tired. Derek asked if she was okay. She replied, yes, it's fun. After that, Derek repeated that if she thought it was impossible, then giving up was also an option. She replied that giving up wasn't her thing. It didn't even count as training. Derek looked at her in surprise and, standing up, said that then he thought she'd rested enough and it was time for her to spar. She asked again, what? She just sat down. 2 weeks later, Elente turned to Denise and asked if she could wake her up when Aseline arrived. She answered, okay, and Elente fell asleep right there on the table, saying how she'd been so absorbed in her magical training lately. Denise said she was curious about something. Why was she torturing herself so much? Elente replied that it was to win, because she wanted to win. Denise looked at her in surprise and told her to hold on because she'd be rooting for her. At that moment, she saw Aseline pass by and announced that Lady Aseline had arrived. Aseline glanced in her direction, and at that moment, Elente stood up and tried to tidy her hair. Her friends were discussing a new clothing store that had opened, and that they should perhaps check it out. They decided to go there with pleasure, and Elente silently looked at the table, and then asked again, "Did she leave?" Denise replied, "Yes," and Elente asked, "She didn't see her, did she?" She was sprawled out on the table. Denise continued reading her book and replied, "Probably not." At that moment, Aseline actually saw her and was wondering if the messages were actually in order. When Elente arrived at her house, the maid was combing her hair and said that a gift from the Duplain house had arrived. Elente asked, "Yes?" She saw a box in front of her, and the maid guessed it must be from Lady Aseline. It contained everything that helps restore mana. These things are of very high quality, so they will be of great help to her. Elente told her to throw them away, and the maid asked, "What?" Elente replied, "Throw them all away so she won't see them again." She replied, "Yes, I understand," and then suggested they finish the preparations. "Is Derek here yet?" The maid replied, "Yes, he arrived at dawn and is preparing for her lesson." A letter was written to the dear young ladies of the Rose Salon. Winter is approaching, and pure white snow will soon fall. How are they all doing in this cold season? Their lands produced many high-quality goods, and she wanted to share this with them. Dear ladies, that's why they're sending this letter. May today be a peaceful day for them, Aseline. Elente paused in thought, and then walked outside to find Derek sitting at a table, reading a book. He saw her approaching and said she was early. Elente began to warm up and said she didn't have time for pleasantries, then asked what his price was. Derek asked again, "What?" Elente replied that he should understand perfectly well. Several weeks of initial training had already passed. Let him be honest with her. What did he think of her? He looked at her silently and said that giving up was also a good strategy. Elente remained silent, then asked why he continued to insult her like that. He looked at the floor and wondered if that's how it sounded. Then he was asking for forgiveness, and Elente asked again, did he ask her about giving up? How? How could one defeat Lady Aseline? Isn't that why she hired him? She didn't hire him to listen to his advice about giving up. If he was going to talk such nonsense, he should just get out of here. Otherwise, he was just wasting her time. Derek asked again, so what if she couldn't win? Obsession with winning could actually hinder growth. Sometimes it was best to immediately accept defeat. And Elente tearfully replied that then she would be too pathetic. Derek looked at her silently, and she continued to cry, saying that she had already told him that she was just a petty lowlife who gossiped about Aseline. A Belmiard prop? A Rose Salon flower? She was nothing like that. She was just a petty, envious piece of crap. She started screaming and crying, admitting that she admitted it all, and how worthless and pathetic she was. All of it. But her whole body was shaking, and she said that she admitted everything, and there was no reason to hate Aseline. She knew this too, but why wouldn't this petty inferiority complex of hers gossip? Why was everything like this? It was self-hatred. She wanted him to understand how serious she was, even if it meant exposing her shameful side. There had always been a hidden self-hatred within her. At first, Derek thought it was simply envy or competitiveness, but it turned out she didn't hate Aseline, she hated herself. This fight wasn't driven by mild envy, it was her only way to escape self-hatred and feelings of inferiority. He offered to win in that case and said he would do everything to ensure she won. Lady Elente, she replied, looking after him, very well. After some time, the carriage arrived at the place and the teacher came out. He looked around the Belmiard County when someone approached him and announced that he had returned from Ebelstein. The teacher bowed and said he hoped he was in good health. The count noted that the journey had been difficult and that he should please sit down. He hadn't seen his treasure for ages. Elente, how is she? Is everything all right? The teacher replied that she's been training her magic even more diligently lately. Tristan grinned and replied that he'd never met anyone as talented as his Elente. This child would surely become his. The teacher laughed and said he hoped so too. He knew he couldn't mention that she was studying with some commoner. It wouldn't benefit either him or Lady Elente. Tristan turned to Velmir and said he'd soon have business in Ebelstein. Velmir was surprised and asked, "What?" Tristan asked, "What if he visited Elente himself and gave her a surprise?" The teacher smiled and replied, yes, she would be very happy. He wondered if everything would be all right. Sometime later, night fell on the outskirts of Ebelstein, a nameless labyrinth. Feline arrived there with Derek, Elente, and Jaden, and she said she was still unsure. Is it really okay to take Lady Elente into the labyrinth? Jaden replies that there's probably a plan. Elente asks, wait, he wants her to go into the labyrinth? He replies that it's the nearest lower rank labyrinth and shouldn't be anything complicated. Elente asks, but what should she do once she's inside? Besides, is it even possible to just walk in? Derek replies that she needs to develop her instincts in real combat and that he and his colleagues will be nearby just in case. She asks alarmed, is he serious about this? He really is serious? Derek replies that there are only a few days left before the training battle, and when time is short, this is the best method. She looked at the labyrinth with fear, and they finally entered. When she looked around and saw slime on the walls, she asked what it was. Derek told everyone to be on guard, because even though it was a low-ranking labyrinth, they couldn't let their guard down. Elente was scared, and suddenly Feline said, Derek, there are several goblins ahead. Elenti exclaimed. What? The protagonist said he could hear them too, and Jaden said there was something large behind them, maybe an ogre. Elenti exclaimed. An ogre? Derek asked again. He can handle one corner, right? Jaden replied, depending on how much you pay him. Derek replied that they would count it when they were done here. After a while, a multitude of monsters appeared in front of them, and Elente realized that these were real monsters in front of her, and her whole body trembled. The goblins began to pounce directly on the guys, and Derek was the first to attack. Elente was stunned when she saw this, and Derek shouted for Feline to cover him. He rushed straight ahead, and Feline began firing her arrows, hitting one of the goblins in the head. After that, Derek cut down the next goblin in his path, and they continued fighting together in this manner. When Derek cut down the next goblin and Feline killed another monster, Elente's mouth opened in shock and suddenly heard a loud scream nearby. A huge ogre appeared behind her, facing Jaden. Jaden asked, how much does this cost, little one? The ogre pounced on him, but Jaden cut off all the creature's limbs, and the goblins also died one by one. When Elente saw all this, she asked herself, what is this? Are they really trying to kill her? She could die for real. This can't be true. This simply can't be true. At that moment, she heard Derek shout her name, and he announced that a monster was heading her way and that she should please pull herself together. Elente was stunned by the sight of the goblin and realized that she was about to die. She repeated this several times, and Derek exclaimed that she must kill it. She realized that she had been like this until now, recalling her words in despair and tensing up, also remembering that her feelings of inferiority did not go away. At that moment, the goblin pounced on her, and she realized that she was simply arrogant and had achieved nothing on her own. All she could do was envy and belittle others. She gathered her will into a fist and created a bright magical glow in her hand, realizing that she had come here to kill herself and become stronger. After these thoughts, she struck the goblin, and Derek silently looked in her direction when he saw that the goblin was dead, because Elente had pierced it with her arrow. Jaden and Feline silently noticed as the goblin rolled over several times and hit the wall, dead. A few beads of sweat dripped down Elente's face, and she frowned as she looked at Derek. She realized she'd taken a step, or rather, finally taken one. After some time, they sat down to rest in the labyrinth, and Derek read a letter stating that more than 2 years had passed since she left Ebelstein. She was now teaching magic to a young lady from Elfster County. She had such a passion for knowledge that she had to teach her so much that sometimes she could barely cope. Remembering those days when she taught him magic while they wandered Ebelstein, it wasn't easy, but it made her feel freer and more joyful. Of all the mages she'd met in her life, he was the most talented. What level had he reached now? When they met, he must definitely show her his magic. This letter was from his former mentor, Katya. 2 weeks had already passed since she started coming here. At that moment, Elente noticed him and asked if he read this every free moment. Now she could ask what it was. He replied that it was a letter from his mentor. Elente was surprised and said that she must be an outstanding teacher to have the stamina to teach someone like him. Derek looked at her silently and then replied that she was their wonderful teacher. Elente blushed and said she was trying to tease him, and Derek asked again, what exactly? She told him to forget about it, and Derek said that there were 2 days left until the duel. How was she feeling? She replied that she didn't even know, but she would win. A competitive spirit had appeared in her. A crowd of people had gathered in the aristocratic quarter of the arena for magical duels. Aseline was chatting with her friends when she suddenly saw Derek passing by. She apologized to the girls and approached Derek, calling him by name. She said she was very glad to see him, and Derek also replied that it had been a while since they'd seen each other. Young lady. Aseline replied that she'd heard about it. They said he was helping young lady Elente with her magic. Derek replied that he was currently working with her, and there was a silence between them. Aseline noted that he was still the same, and she hoped he hadn't been too harsh with her. Diela mentioned that he wasn't quite the usual teacher. Young lady Elente had looked very tired lately. Derek asked again, was she worried about her rival? She seemed confident. Aseline apologized to him, and Derek frowned, saying that whoever her opponent was, she shouldn't relax. At that moment, Aseline tensed up and said nothing. Denise, sitting alone among the noisy groups, overheard the girls discussing who they thought would win. Another girl replied that it would certainly be young lady Aseline, unless Elente used the magic of the second star. Poor young lady Elente, she had lost so much weight that all that remained of her face were her eyes. Denise continued reading her book silently when Aseline suddenly stood up and bowed to everyone when they noticed her. People wondered why she still looked so beautiful today. She was smiling, and at that moment Elente appeared opposite her, fearfully declaring that she would win. She walked onto the stage, confident, and declared that she would definitely achieve this victory. Derek observed all her actions and watched her go. A moment later, the girls found themselves in the arena facing each other. Aseline bowed and said that she hoped she was in good health. Elente also replied that she believed she was doing well too. Her constant composure served as an example for her. Aseline replied, no, she had never been as nervous before a fight as she was now. Elente asked again, will they begin? Aseline gave her a sign, and at that moment, Elente created a fiery magical flame in her hand. Elente also used her powers, placing her hand over her heart, and they began to gradually spread their power. Suddenly, Elente cast a special spell and began attacking the frightened Aseline, who stared at the arrows that appeared, dumbfounded. Elente was confident, remembering that day in the dungeon when they had destroyed so many monsters. Derek said that if this were a pure contest of magical skills, she would never win. She asked, so what should she do? How could she win? He replied that it was willpower. She had trained with him to squeeze her mana to the limit. Elente stopped him and asked, so he wasn't tormenting her like this for some sick hobby? Derek replied that he had no such hobbies. Once both sides' mana ran out, the outcome would be decided by willpower, not skill. She must use magic as generously and extensively as possible, by any means necessary, to drag this into a war of attrition. When this war ends, the winner will be the one who can squeeze out at least one drop of energy. Elente asked again, but what if Aseline's reserves are much greater than hers? Derek replied that in that case she would lose. Mana is largely determined at birth, and the young lady had Belmiard blood in her, so she needed to believe in herself. She recalled all these words, and Aseline understood. Young lady Elente, was she really that strong? Elente raised her hand and cast all those fiery arrows directly at Aseline, which she understood, and yet she would fight. She created a magical defense around herself and realized there was no way she could defeat her. At that moment, both girls began to give it their all. Elente continued to act, and Aseline protected herself with a barrier for a while, and a moment later, a powerful explosion occurred in the arena. People began to wonder, could this really be Lady Elente's magic? Her mana reserves seemed to have increased exponentially. Aseline stood stunned, pondering the power of her spells, which were astounding, but she was simply firing indiscriminately. At this rate, her mana would run out in an instant. She paid attention and realized Elente had been caught. Now it was her turn. At that moment, she threw her magic arrow in her direction. Elente noticed, and Aseline realized it simply couldn't be happening. It was illusion magic. To control illusions like that, she needed an incredible amount of mana. At that moment, Elente appeared directly behind her, and Aseline, noticing this, was stunned. Elente recalled her conversation with Derek, who had said it was a matter of work. She had to first block her vision with fire arrows and then use illusions to confuse her. After that, she had to close the distance and strike her with ice spears at point-blank range. Even an experienced mage would make a mistake and fall for this trick, but her opponent wasn't just any experienced mage. Aseline, seeing her approach, realized they were ice copies from such a distance. She wouldn't have time to activate defensive magic. In that case, she'd have to use a different power. She grabbed her hand, and at that moment, Elente struck her with her arrow, causing Aseline to fall to the ground. Elente landed and was stunned when she saw that Aseline hadn't fallen after all, but was still clinging to the ground. She didn't understand what was happening. Aseline felt it was close. She remembered Derek's words, telling her that no matter who her opponent was, she mustn't waste time. Now she understood what Derek meant. Her skill level and the way she used magic had changed everything within her. Then she too would press with brute force. In a direct confrontation, she wouldn't lose. Aseline began to spread her magical powers, and magical arrows began to emerge from the ground. The people watching realized they were all ice copies. Creating so many copies without a single spell was astonishing. Derek watched from the sidelines and realized she'd swallowed a knife. Elente was dumbfounded, and Aseline considered admitting that Lady Elente had grown incredibly tall. At that moment, Elente made a sharp movement with her hands behind her back. Aseline suggested she try and deflect that too. Their eyes locked, and she unleashed a fiery force from behind, which began to overwhelm Aseline from behind. When she felt it, she saw that all her arrows had been shattered, and she was horrified that she'd managed to release this at an unknown moment. Aseline hadn't even felt the spell or the streams. Had she really been hiding one arrow all this time, saving it for just such an occasion? When the arrow fell at her feet, Elente chuckled, and Aseline realized she couldn't read it and had no idea what she would do next. The people around her didn't understand what was happening. Were they really fighting on equal terms? It was the letters that impressed them. Elente wondered if she could handle it, right? She was superior to Aseline right now, wasn't she? Aseline had already woken up to the thought that she couldn't win under these circumstances. Tactics and determination, Lady Elente was one step ahead. Then let her reset everything from the very beginning. Derek watched them from the sidelines and said that now everything was really beginning. Aseline conjured up an embodiment of magic around herself, and Elente froze, looking at her questioningly, after which she pulled out her hand to shield herself from the wind. She didn't understand where it had come from so suddenly, and it didn't look like magic. She froze and realized she couldn't sense mana around her. It only lasted a moment, but the mana in the area vanished. Mana balancing is a phenomenon where energy is temporarily suppressed, dominating all surrounding mana. When one releases mana beyond its boundaries, all mana nearby undergoes the balancing. Aseline continued to create a bright fireball in the sky. Simply put, at that very moment, Aseline surpassed her own limit. It was the fireball of the second star. When Elente recalled her past training and how she fell to the ground, trying to catch her breath, Derek approached her and offered her a drink of water. She thanked him and said that she was truly unsure if she could defeat Aseline. Could she really win after weeks of training? He replied that she would win, or rather, she would win in a certain sense. At that moment, the people around her were stunned when they saw that it was indeed fire. Was this really a fire shield, the magic of the second star? Elente realized it was a fireball, and they weren't prepared for this. She immediately turned to Derek, unsure what to do. He silently looked into her eyes, and Elente mentally cursed him for making such a stupid face. He should have said something useful. He was a fraud. She looked at him with tears in her eyes when suddenly a fireball began approaching her, and she began screaming loudly. She didn't know what to do. Defensive magic? How to block the second star's spells? An ice spear? But it wouldn't work. She knew it was impossible to defeat Aseline, someone like her, but at that moment, everyone around her tensed up at what they saw, and Elente was thrown aside by the blow. Aseline was startled, and at that moment, everything exploded. Elente covered her face with her hands and was thrown back several times. Aseline tried to catch her breath from the fright, and Elente, landing, looked into her eyes, and Aseline wondered if she had really dodged it, and she used the same method as her, even though she'd only seen it once. Derek watched silently, pondering the situation. Lack of experience, the magic of the second star in the hands of an inexperienced mage, it was nothing more than a mana-devouring monster. Everyone's hands began to shake, and Derek realized that Lady Aseline had acknowledged Lady Elente's suffering and talent, and was now fighting with all her might. This was her way of showing courtesy and respect for someone who was so stubbornly opposing her. Elente caught her breath and, smiling, understood what he was thinking. If she could endure this, she would prevail. At that moment, Aseline again created a magical fireball above herself and, enraged, struck Elente again. The spectators were stunned by what was happening. Was this really another fireball? This one was much faster than the last one. Elente deftly moved from side to side to avoid the attack, and Aseline even closed her eyes, unsure what to expect. But Elente touched the ground with her hands and leaped into the sky again from the attack. Aseline, who saw this, was horrified, and Elente smiled and looked at her, then realized that if she did this, she wouldn't be able to read the trajectory of her attack. At that moment, she realized that using a protective barrier would only waste her mana. What would she do now, Aseline? Aseline landed on her knees and created a shield around herself to counter the attack. Elente wondered if this was just a simple manifestation of magic instead of defensive magic. She had used up all her mana twice creating and controlling the fireball. Aseline tried to catch her breath, and Derek realized it would soon be over. Elente realized it had worked, and she had cornered her. She definitely had no mana left. Her mana, she could still use a magic arrow or ice spear at least twice more, and that was more than enough, meaning she had defeated Aseline. Suddenly, she saw a fireball within her barrier. This startled her greatly, and the fireball burst through her barrier again. After that, Aseline collapsed, exhausted, and the ball flew past Elente. She silently looked at the destroyed Aseline, who was trembling and begging, please, just one more time. If she just tried a little more, everything would work out. She looked at her hand, which was trembling and practically no longer had any magic left. Elente looked down at her, and they exchanged glances. Aseline Duplain, it's safe to say that in Ebelstein there is no noble lady as majestic as she. But where there is light, there must be a shadow. And that shadow has always been her. She too is just a spoiled aristocrat, isn't she? Everyone was whispering behind her back like, what made her think she was any different? Let her turn around and throw a pathetic hysterical fit. She was a precious stone, a stone that shone brighter under the pressure of its cutting, and she would remain eclipsed by that light, lost in the abyss of her own worthlessness. But even there, she sharpened her blade so that one day she could truly become better than her and prove to herself that she could escape this endlessly empty abyss. And at that moment, she stood confidently and looked at the tired Aseline, noble and beautiful Aseline, with her hair disheveled and covered in dust, even after she'd rolled around in the dirt in front of all these people. How could she maintain her appearance? It seems she didn't need to worry about her image in the eyes of others. She always simply did the best she could. At that moment, the spectators began to support her, shouting at her to hold on, that she could do it, that she needed to get up. Hearing this, she created fire in her hand and wondered, Derek, can she really defeat her? Derek replied that she would win anyway, that's all. Even if she won this fight, she would still end up here. Aseline, who had created magic in her hand, realized, oh my god, and Elente said she was out of mana. Aseline asked again, what? Elente replied that, as expected, she was no match for Lady Aseline. She admitted her defeat. It had been a good fight. At that moment, she bowed, and all the spectators began shouting, Lady Aseline, this was incredible. Elente looked at her with embarrassment and a smile in her eyes, and Aseline also looked at her in surprise. After a while, everyone began congratulating Lady Aseline and asking how she learned the magic of the second star. This fight was incredible. She watched Elente, who was walking away. Derek, who saw her, met Elente and asked, well, did he see everything clearly? Derek replied, yes. And Elente asked, he's surprised, isn't he? She also knows how to admit defeat gracefully. He should have seen Aseline's face. Derek asked again, how did it go? He replied that her eyes were wide open, her expression was written all over. Was she giving up right now? Even the eternally calm Aseline could make such faces? It was an unforgettable sight, and she only saw it thanks to him. Thanks to him, she even felt superior and felt simply wonderful. And she asked again, how did he like it? The ending was a bit disappointing, but overall, it was pretty good, right? She's a pretty quick learner. Can you see that? Just don't let him think of nitpicking. At that moment, tears started streaming down her eyes, and she looked questioningly at Derek, who hadn't said anything. She abruptly looked at her hands and immediately sat down on the floor, sobbing, asking again, What was that? She wasn't a child anymore, after all. Derek replied that she was flawless and that she was doing well. Elente continued to cry silently when he suddenly said that, frankly, she so wanted to win. But just as she was about to end it, she saw something. Even if she won, she would still remain the same. She would simply return to that pathetic place again and realize that this is just who she is. Even at such a moment, Aseline looked noble. It seemed she surpassed Aseline in only one thing: her inferiority complex. Derek responded that he was no different from her, and what difference did it make if she looked a little pathetic? Elente turned to him with tears in her eyes, and Derek replied that if she didn't have the courage to look pathetic, she would never improve. After that, she continued to cry a little, remembering how everything had happened. At least today, she wasn't stuck in one place. Denise, who saw them standing nearby, decided to come closer. The girls said goodbye to Aseline, saying that today's match had been exciting. Aseline thanked them, and Denise told her she'd achieved another success. Goosebumps ran down her spine as she watched the duel. Aseline asked again. Lady Denise, she realized, didn't she too, that she hadn't won this duel? Denise smiled and said nothing, and Aseline also fell silent, after which Denise finally said that, in terms of mana, she thought she was far ahead. Aseline realized that no, it wasn't enough to cover such a difference in strength. She'd surpassed her in everything, managing to advance so much in such a short time. That was truly remarkable. She recalled Derek's expression, and at that moment called the maid Daisy, who replied, "Yes, my lady." She said she needed to send a letter to the main house. She needed Derek. When a new day dawned, Raymond asked, "What does a 6th-star pass do in Ebelstein?" Valerian said the reason was unknown, but it seemed the customs agreement had been moved forward, likely due to Sir Drest's relocation. He paused and replied that he'd been wondering why Count Belmayard had come to Ebelstein. It seemed that had something to do with it. If someone had reached the heights of the art of searching and possessed the gift of foresight, there must be a reason. Valerian told his father that he received a letter from his sister, asking him to find a magic teacher. He asked again, can't he find someone? Valerian replied that she'd specifically asked for Derek, but there was a slight problem. He was currently at the Belmayard estate teaching magic to Lady Elente. He grinned and realized he was considering sending their butler to handle the negotiations. There was no need. He had business to attend to anyway, and he could sort everything out while he was there. When evening came, Elente and Derek sat down at the table, and she was getting ready to rest a bit. Studying or whatever, she needs a break. She wants to clear her head. He'll continue working for the mercenary company, right? He replied that he thought so, and at that moment she touched his leg with her foot and moved closer to him. Then she asked if he'd come again if she called him to teach her magic. After a brief silence, he replied of course, but he wasn't sure he had anything to teach her. Elente asked again, "Oh my god, where does such unexpected modesty come from? Winter is finally coming to an end. It's been a long time, hasn't it?" After some time, Derek returned to the tavern and Feline called out his name. Jaden also noticed him, and Derek announced that he had returned. The next morning, the carriage with the Count arrived in the city. Elente was sleeping in her bed and heard strange sounds, causing her to cover her face with a pillow and scream. She had said she was resting today, and there would be no lessons. The maid said she thought she should go out and see. When Elente got up, she asked why. She'd told him to just say she wasn't there. Hadn't she heard her? From today? But before she could finish her sentence, she opened the door and saw the Count, who was delighted to see her and said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. His pride, his pearl, his treasure. She immediately closed the door and wondered why her father was here. Then she abruptly opened the door, grinned, and asked what brought him so far away. She wanted to change and go out for a minute, let him wait for her, and then she slammed the door again. The Count spoke, his love, his treasure, and fell silent. When they went outside to have breakfast, the Count guessed that young Lady Aseline was certainly a formidable adversary. She replied that she had learned a lot from her, and the Count remarked that if this mercenary was such a good teacher, it would be better to keep him exclusively in their city. Elente was surprised and said that the vassals would object, which made the Count laugh and say, not to worry. Is there anything he wouldn't do for her? She should just trust her father. Elente was embarrassed and put her hope in him. Sometime later, they find themselves back in the labyrinth on a mission, and Feline shouted to Derek that the master was behind him, warning him. Derek used his magical powers when he suddenly felt something strange, and using his magic, sensed a 3rd star. He cast a firewall spell, and a bright light appeared around him. Feline cried out his name in fear, and such a loud roar erupted that even the birds scattered. When evening came, they returned to the tavern and discussed how Derek almost died. Feline told Jaden not to even mention it. Were all mages like that? Why was he trying to use 3rd-star spells while hunting goblins? Derek replied that in the midst of it, he felt a strange sense of inadequacy, just like when he first reached the 2nd star. Someone behind him had told him not to worry about being stuck, not to push through. Hadn't the school of savagery always strived for a natural flow? Of course, such advice usually didn't work with legs like his. He clearly couldn't sense a trace, and the man standing before his eyes was clearly the first and greatest 6th-star seeker. The man removed his hood, revealing himself to be a wandering spirit addressed. He said that if he had any decent liquor, he should please bring it, He was tired from the journey. That evening, Diella was training, right on the street, and used the magical powers around her. She looked into the distance and, enraged, created a magic arrow, but was suddenly dumbfounded. The arrow disintegrated a moment later, and she began screaming, "What is this?" This was so annoying. She fell to her feet, and Reg approached her, saying he thought she'd matured a bit, but her personality hadn't changed one bit. She exclaimed, "When did he manage to come?" Reg replied that she'd managed to summon 5 of them, thanks to a good teacher after all. She chuckled and replied that it was because he was talented. And what did that selfish idiot Derek have to do with it? Reg replied that it seemed Aseline was planning to hire the aforementioned selfish idiot as her magic teacher. Diella started screaming, "What? That simply couldn't be true. What if he treated her the same way he treated her?" Reg told her not to say things that would make people misunderstand Derek. Reg also said that he'd recently heard that Lady Elenti also wanted Derek to remain in her service. Diella couldn't understand why this guy was so popular, and at that moment, Reg replied that he'd turned a lackey like her into a human, so it was no wonder he was popular. Diella got angry and started yelling, "What did he call her?" Although, yes, that had happened, and Reg asked again, wouldn't it be better if Derek chose Aseline? That way, she could at least possibly meet the same Derek she was also waiting to see again. She exclaimed, "Who said she wanted to see that idiot?" She blushed with embarrassment, and Reg replied, "Of course he'll take her word for it. Rumors about Derek must have spread quite a bit by now. He hoped the number of competitors wouldn't increase.